My favorite clip of Jordan Peterson.
Do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And
this is going to happen for sure, is that the net deaths from people stopping using valid vaccines as a consequence of general skepticism about vaccination is going to cause, in my estimation, over any reasonable amount of time, far more deaths than COVID itself caused. You violate people's trust.
That's your fault, Jordan. You're the one propagating misinformation. You can't. Oh my god. You can't literally be like, well, what do you make of the excess deaths in Europe that are 20%? What do you think of myocarditis? And then say, well, I think the long-term cost from people mistrusting vaccines is going to be really high. And that's because the left's fault. Because they're using force. You're literally the one spreading misinformation about the excess deaths of the COVID vaccines. Thanks for the sub, man.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today talking to Stephen Bunnell, known professionally and online as Destiny. He's an American streamer, debater, and political commentator. He really came to my attention, I would say, as a consequence of the discussion he had with Ben Shapiro and Lex Friedman, and I decided to talk to him, not least because it's not that easy to bring people who are identified, at least to some degree, with the political beliefs on the left into a studio where I can actually have a conversation with them. I've tried that more often than you might think. And it happens now and then, but not very often. So today we talk a lot about, well, the differences between the left and the right and the dangers of political ideology per se and the use of power as opposed to invitation and all sorts of other often heated and contentious issues. And so you're welcome to join us. And I was happy to have the opportunity to do this. So I guess we might as well start by letting the people who don't know who you are get to know who you are with a little bit more precision. So why have you become known and how has that developed?
It's a pretty broad question. I think I started streaming around 15 years ago when it wasn't really a thing yet. There were a few people that did it. I started early on. I guess back then you weren't a professional gamer yet because the game had just started to come out, but there was a game called StarCraft 2, and I streamed myself playing that game. I was a pretty good player. It was pretty entertaining to watch. And then I kind of grew over, I guess maybe the next 7 years, just streaming that people would watch.
Streaming on YouTube?
Well, back then I started on a website called Livestream. Then I switched to Ustream. Then I switched to a site called Justin TV. And then that turned into Twitch.tv. So after streaming there for like 7 or 8 years, I was a semi-professional StarCraft 2 gamer. That game kind of came and went, but I had a lot of other interests. Around 2016, I started to get more involved into the world of politics. It's kind of a left-leaning figure because of my background in like esports and internet gaming and internet trash talk. I had more of a kind of like a combative attitude, and that was kind of rare for left-leaning people at the time. So it's basically where my early political popularity came from. I think from like 2016 to 2018 was debating right-wing people.
So was there a game-like element to the debating, do you think? And is that part of why that morphing made sense?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, if you get really reductionist, everything in life is kind of a game, but that's not very satisfying. I think I grew up like very argumentative. My mom is from Cuba, so my family was like very conservative. And then I grew up like listening to the news all day, listening to my mom's political opinions all day. And then I argued with kids in high school and everything. And I've always been kind of like an argumentative, type A, aggressive personality. So I think that probably lent itself well to the political stuff in 2016, yeah.
Was that useful in gaming? That personality?
In some ways, yeah. In some ways, no. I don't know directly for the games itself. I don't know how much it necessarily mattered. But for all the peripheral stuff, in some ways it was really beneficial. I could kind of like cut out my own path and I could be very unique and I could kind of be on my own. In some ways it was very detrimental. I can be very difficult to get along with. And I'm very much kind of like, I want to do this thing. And if you try to tell me what to do, I don't want to have like a sponsor or a team or anybody kind of with a leash on me. So yeah, I guess it worked out.
It's interesting because the temperamental proclivity that you're describing, that's associated with low agreeableness. And generally, and that's more combative, it's more stubborn, it's more implacable, it's more competitive.
Bro, why did he... Did he invite Destiny on just so he can do a psychoanalysis of Destiny?
The downside is that it's
Is that
more
really the
skeptical,
most important thing that they could be
more
talking about?
cynical, it can be less cooperative. But generally, a temperament like that is not associated with political belief on the left, because the leftists tend to be characterized by higher levels of compassion, and that's low agreeableness. So, that element of your temperament at least is quite masculine, and a lot of the ideology that characterizes the modern left.
But Destiny's the girl's name.
Temperamentally feminine nature. So, all right. So why do you think the shift from your popularity to political commentary worked? And you said that started about 2016. And why do you think that shift happened for you, like in terms of your interest?
I think I've always been interested in a lot of things. Like I grew up with a very strong political bend. It was conservative until I got into my streaming years, probably 5 or 6 years into streaming. I slowly kind of started to shift to the left. I would say that, I guess in around 2016, when I saw all of the conversations going on with the election and when all the issues being talked about, I felt like the conversations were very low quality. And in my naivety, I thought that maybe I could come in and boost the quality, at least in like my little corner of the internet, to have better conversations about what was going on. And so that was basically my injection point into all of that was, fighting about those political issues and then arguing with people about them, doing research and reading and all of that. Yeah.
And so did you do that by video to begin with as well?
Yeah, it was all streaming. Yeah.
It was all streaming. And so I presume you built an audience among the people who were following you as a gamer first, and then that started to expand. Is that correct?
Basically, yeah. Without getting too much into like the business or streaming side of things, basically, actually, this probably carries over to basically to all media, I would imagine, is you've got people that will watch you for special events. So maybe you're like a commentator of the Super Bowl, or maybe you're hosting like a really huge event. Then you've got people who will watch you every time you're participating in your area of expertise. So for me, that's like
you guys right now.
I might be playing. It might be when you're on like a particular show or something that people watch you for. And then the fundamental fan, like the best fan that you're converting to the lowest.
Oh wait, no, sorry.
Most loyal.
These are you
viewer,
guys.
I guess, is somebody that's watching you basically no matter what you're doing, and these are the people that'll follow you from area to area.
That's my chat right now.
Because of the way I did gaming, and I talked about a lot of other stuff, whether it was politics, science, current events, whatever. I had a lot of loyal fans that kind of followed me wherever I went. So quite a few of them stuck in Star Trek.
So you established a reputation.
Yeah.
So how would you characterize your reach now? How would you quantify it?
My viewership went down to 2.
Can you be more precise?
How many people are watching a typical video that you might produce, and what are you doing for subscribers, say on YouTube?
Dude, why the fuck are they even talking about that? I don't care. Playback speed 1.75.
Any idea about total reach?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my subscribers on YouTube, I have around, I think that's around 770,000 on my main channel. I think I probably do between all 3 channels, I think around 15 to 20 million views a month. And then I live stream to anywhere from 5 to 15,000 concurrent viewers a day, or hopefully around 8 hours a day. Yeah.
Okay. So you have quite a substantial reach. And so you said that initially you were more conservative leaning, but that changed. What did it mean that you were more conservative leaning, and how and why did that change?
When I started conservative leaning, I was writing articles for my school newspaper defending George Bush in the Iraq War. I was like very much like I think it's like an insult now when people say like neocon, but I was like very much like a conservative, a Bush era conservative. So supported big business, supported traditional, all of the conservative, I guess, like foreign policy, hawkish foreign policy, for whatever that meant as like a 14, 15-year-old.
Right.
There was the whole Elian Gonzalez incident that was very big for Cuban Americans, where there was a Cuban boy that tried to come to the United States with several other people and his mother, and their raft, I guess, crashed or something happened. I think his mom died and some other people died, and there was a huge debate on whether or not to send him back to Cuba, and Clinton ended up sending him back to Cuba, and I know that my mom was super irritated and all that, to say the least. And then once I hit college, I think I supported Ron Paul in 2008. So I was a big Ron Paul libertarian guy in high school. When I went to a Catholic Jesuit high school, and I kind of became atheist in that process. I started reading Ayn Rand. So I was very, 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 very conservative.
On the libertarian end?
I would say so, yeah. Initially on the, like...
That makes more sense in relationship to your temperament.
Sure, maybe, yeah. Initially it was like Christian conservative, and then it became like libertarian
conservative.
Who cares?
That makes more sense in according to your temperament.
I started working, I kind of had to drop out of school, I was working, and then I got into streaming. And once I started streaming, I had a son, basically around the first year I started streaming. As I started to go through life, and I went from kind of being in this like working poor position to making a lot of money, especially through the lens of my child, I saw how different life was when I had more money versus less. And I guess like the differences between what was available to me and then my child as I made more money while I was really wealthy versus not as wealthy, it kind of started to change the way that I
so you got more attuned to the consequences of inequality?
Basically, I would say, yeah.
Okay, and so how did that lead you to develop more sympathy for left-leaning ideas, particularly?
I guess my core beliefs have never really changed, but I think the way that those become applied kind of change. So much the same way that you might think that everybody deserves a shot to go to school and have an education. That might be like a core belief, where as a libertarian or conservative, I might think that as long as the school is available, everybody's got the opportunity to go and study. But maybe now as like a liberal or progressive or whatever you call me, I might say, okay, well, we need to make sure that there's enough, maybe like food in the household or some kind of funding program to make sure the kid can actually go to school and study, basically. So like the core drive is the same, but I think the applied principle ends up changing a bit based on what
Right. So is your concern essentially something like the observation that if people are bereft enough of substance, let's say, that it's difficult for them to take advantage of equal opportunity?
If a person is bereft enough of substance. That's such a goofy way to phrase that, man. I mean, sorry, that's a genius 200 IQ way to phrase that.
Opportunities, even if they are presented to them, let's say.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
And you have some belief, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have some belief that there is room for state intervention at the level of basic provision to make those opportunities more manifest.
Yeah, to varying degrees, yeah.
Okay. So let's start talking more broadly then on the political side. So
Watch some of this ideological thing real quick. I don't think I'm going to watch it right now, but maybe
it's been
after.
a while since I last talked about
Explaining my post-liberal. Oh, I don't really care about this one person's post-liberal ideology thing. We're not going to watch it right now.
how would you characterize the difference in your opinion between
Only 9
the
minutes,
left and
yeah, but
the conservative political viewpoints?
On a very, very, very broad level, if there's some, I would say there's some like good,
why do I care about some random guy's post-liberal ideology? Like, is it like, how is that relevant now?
good world that we're all aiming for. I think people on the left seem to think that a collection of taxes from a large population that goes into a government that's able to precisely kind of dole out where that tax money goes, you're basically able to take the problems of society, you're able to scrape off, hopefully, not super significant amount of money from people that can afford to give a lot of money, and then through government programs of redistribution, you target those taxes essentially to people that kind of need whatever bare minimum to take advantage of society.
Okay.
And then on the conservative end, I guess
Washington
conservative would generally think that why would the government take my money? I think from a community point of view, through churches, through community action, through families, we can better allocate.
What even the ideology? Right now, Jordan Peterson is doing a psychoanalysis of destiny and saying that his liberal ideology is not suitable of his disagreeable personality traits. We can maybe watch some of it, but like, what's it even? I don't get it.
It's been a while since I last talked about post-liberalism. I thought it'd make sense to explain it again. It's what sets me apart from other people on the right. Prior to capitalism, we had a feudalist system. Under this system, you could be born a serf or could be born a nobleman. You were basically stuck in that position for your entire life. All men were ultimately equal under God, though. So on Sundays, even the serfs got to be at least as good as everyone else. Under feudalism, the social structure was rigid and inflexible. It did, however, promote culture centered around the institution of the church. We also all shared a common system of morality through Christian virtue. Capitalism offered several advantages over feudalism. By far, the biggest one was significantly more economic output. Under capitalism, much more food and industrial goods were capable of being produced. That's because each individual person has an economic incentive in the process. Let's say you work at a dildo factory. If you can make more dildos than everyone else, you're likely to get a raise or some sort of bonus. The other employees then have the incentive to do just as well as you. Capitalism also offered the opportunity of class mobility, at least in theory. Capitalism also had some downsides. The biggest one was that it created massive wealth inequality. It also had a tendency to conflict with pre-existing culture and morality. Given the fact that capitalism wasn't perfect, it soon became the subject of critique. The most influential critique of capitalism came from Karl Marx. In my view, Karl Marx's critique is a mixed bag. Some aspects of capitalism are indeed pretty unfair. However, Marx exaggerates everything to make it seem like a giant conspiracy by the bourgeoisie. Marx suggested a socialist or communist revolution as a solution to the problems of capitalism. Many nations have tried to implement these socialist policies. Every time it's been tried, though, it fails. The reason that capitalism works is the incentive it gives to individual people. If you take that incentive away by collectivizing or offering things for free, you ruin what makes capitalism.
This is just like the most like centrist basic explanation.
It's worth noting that Marx only critiques capitalism for the inequality that it causes. He's completely silent on the conflict between capitalism and culture and morality. As a post-liberal
that's kind of true. I mean, I want to say he critiques it only for inequality.
Conservative, I'm skeptical.
Like there's other stuff in there.
Of both capitalism and Marxism. I'm specifically concerned with the fact that both of these ideologies have destroyed our culture. I also believe they've led to our moral corruption and decay. Now, that doesn't mean I support the abolition of capitalism. I don't want to return to some sort of feudal economy for reasons that ought to be obvious. What I will say is we're currently on the road to nowhere. The end goal of capitalism isn't maximum human happiness. It's just more capitalism. The longer we walk on this road with no destination in mind, the more opportunities there'll be for Marxists to ambush us. As a post-liberal conservative, I advocate for picking a destination. We're human beings, not cogs in a machine. Humans require an authentic culture and a system of morality to live fulfilling lives. There's more important things in life than playing The Last of Us Part 2 or getting more plastic crap from Walmart. Culture and morality should be put first and foremost in our society. Capitalism ought to serve us and our objectives. We shouldn't be the ones submitting ourselves to serve capitalism. We're not bootlickers. We're citizens of a democratic republic. Capitalism and Marxism are not cultures. Real culture is rooted in a community's traditions. It's connected to a specific time and place. Consuming films or music created by people you've never met, mass-produced in a Chinese factory, isn't culture. The cultural decline that has coincided with the decline in happiness is well illustrated in this book. In the 1950s, America had robust communities that led people to participate in things like bowling leagues. These sorts of things have entirely disappeared as people become more and more more isolated from each other. These days, it's impossible.
I mean, maybe we're growing. I think we definitely are growing more isolated in some way, and like I would agree with this point. Like right now, like, but no economic system is going to have like an end goal in mind. The point is, like, we have other things to sort of try and rein in like an economic system, right? I don't know. Anyway, that like. I would like in general we're growing more isolated, but like I don't like my dad's a part of like a pickleball league.
Possible to even get someone to talk on it.
I have 4 viewers right now on Twitch, and maybe someone kicking YouTube.
Xbox Live anymore. It's also worth noting that capitalism and Marxism aren't moralities. Property rights will never be ethics. Just let me use one of Jonathan Haidt's examples. Is it ethical for an adult brother and sister to have consensual sex with each other? Let's assume, of course, that they use a condom and the sister is on birth control. If you believe that property rights is ethics, the answer is clearly yes, it is ethical. After all, no one's property rights are violated by this. If that's your answer to this question, please hand me your conservative membership
I knew they was gonna fucking put a
card and get the
fix
fuck
your
out of
destiny
here. Now,
up.
I'm not saying I have the map to some sort of utopia. I'm not a Marxist. Even if we did reboot our culture and morality, wealth inequality would still persist. If people are equal members of a shared community, culture, and morality, that wouldn't matter so much though. Just like the serfs and nobles got to be equal at church each Sunday under feudalism, having a shared culture and morality would give us a sense of shared dignity. Right now, we lack anything that connects us all together. Now, let's talk about the right. I don't see any point in myself debating the right. I'm right-wing myself, even though my reasoning may be very different. I'm not trying to say that I'm right and they're wrong. I don't care about that. I just want people to understand my perspective. First off, I don't buy that politics is a battle between the good guys on the right and the bad guys on the left. That's one of Jonathan Haidt's great untruths. Nobody in politics is evil. Let's start out with the commie left. These guys don't promote socialism because they want people to suffer. They honestly believe that socialism will work. All those times that it didn't work were not real socialism. Now, the not real socialism thing is really fucking stupid. I'd say the countries that half-ass socialism by being actually more
What?
capitalistic are the ones that are actually more successful. That's certainly been true of communist China. Simply being stupid, though, is not the same as being evil. What about the neolibs? I did a video about corrupt Joe Biden wanting to start more wars. I mean, millions of people
Corrupt Joe Biden wanted to start more wars. Do you mean striking the Houthis after they attacked us first?
could be killed. No, I don't believe the neolibs are really evil either. They support a foreign policy called idealism. They believe the U.S. should use its military to spread liberalism and protect human rights. By launching these wars, they think the world will be better off this way.
Spreading liberalism and protecting human rights is when you strike a terrorist organization that started attacking you first.
Does it make sense to allow millions of people to die in order to protect rights? Fuck no. Idealism
Bro, we're attacking. Bro, the Houthis attacked us first.
is a terrible foreign policy. A
We're
child
defending ourselves.
could see its inherent contradictions. Yet people are willing to support stupid ideas if it's part of their political philosophy. While this can make someone very dangerous, it doesn't mean that they're evil. And don't get me started on this war for oil bullshit either.
This video is using. Oh.
The U.S. has never taken these countries' oil. These wars are a waste of money and they don't
What is he talking about? Ukraine then? Russia invaded Ukraine.
benefit the United States whatsoever. I also don't believe we're on the verge of some sort of communist revolution. I think the greatest threat that we face is getting stuck in the same loop we've had for the last 30 years. Our only choice for leadership will be a neoliberal Barack Obama versus a neoliberal Mitt Romney. The reality is socialism just isn't popular among the leaders of the Democratic Party. Why would it be? The Democrats, just like the Republicans, are funded heavily by banks, hedge funds, and global corporations. None of these entities would support the United States becoming socialist. The Barack Obama administration is illustrative. Even when Democrats controlled the presidency and both branches of Congress, no legislation was passed making the U.S. more socialist. Obamacare didn't even include
What you say more socialist? I don't like that. I don't like because technically Obamacare is more socialist than not having Obamacare, but it's not socialist.
a public option. It was far more libertarian than the healthcare systems of Canada or the United Kingdom. Barack Obama also made no effort to prosecute or regulate Wall Street after the mortgage crisis. That's hardly the sort of response that you would expect.
But we did introduce new regulations after, because the fucking Glenn Stiegel Act, it was repealed, and then after 2008, some of it was put back into place. Glass-Steagall Act. Post 2008 banking regulations. I don't know. We definitely did we put some restrictions back after 2008. Yeah, the Dodd-Frank Act and the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. Yeah, I don't yeah. And one guy did, one singular person did go to jail for the 2008 financial crash. One person jail, 2008 crash. This was the one guy that went to jail. A single guy. So, pretty based Obama.
Back from a socialist. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be concerned at all about socialism. Bernie Sanders was a popular political candidate. If we remain on this road to nowhere, socialism will only become more popular over time. More capitalism at the expense of morality and culture will not save the right. It will just prevent us from ever arriving at a destination. Conservatives have been on the same path for a long time, and they've lost again and again to the left. That's why I believe that post-liberalism is the true conservatism. It's the only way that conservatives are ever going to win. Anyways, that's all I have to say on this subject. If you
Bro, I don't know. I understand some of his points, but like, I don't understand what he's advocating for. No economic system is going to have like a goal in mind that's like focused on our culture and shit.
Get our own dollars to our own friends and family to help them and give them the things that they need so that they can better participate in and thrive in society, basically.
Okay, so one of the things that I've always found a mystery, and I think there's an equal mystery on the left and on the right in this regard, is that the more conservative types tend to be very skeptical of big government, and the leftist types tend to be more skeptical of big corporations. Right? Well, so following through the logic that you just laid out, you made the suggestion that one of the things that characterizes people on the left is the belief that government can act as an agent of can and should act as an agent of distribution. Okay, a potential problem for that is the gigantism of the government that does that. Now, the conservatives are skeptical of that gigantism, and likewise, the liberals, the progressives in particular, we'll call them progressives, are skeptical of the reach of gigantic corporations. And I've always seen a commonality in those two, in that both of them are skeptical of gigantism. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about, generally speaking, with regard to the potential for the rise of tyranny is the emergence of giants. And one potential problem with the view that the government can and should act as an agent of redistribution is that there is an incentive put in place, two kinds of incentives. Number one, a major league incentive towards gigantism and tyranny. And number two, an incentive for psychopaths who use compassion to justify their grip on power, to take money and to claim that they're doing good. And I see that happening everywhere now particularly in the name of compassion. And it's one of the things that's made me very skeptical, in particular about the left, and at least about the progressive edge of the left. So I'm curious about what you think about those two. First of all, it's a paradox to me that the conservatives and the leftists face off each other with regard to their concern about different forms of gigantism, and don't seem to notice that the thing that unites them is some antipathy. This is especially true for the libertarians, some antipathy towards gigantic structures per se. And so then I would say, with regards to your antithesis between liberalism and conservatives, the conservatives are pointing to the fact that there are intermediary forms of distribution that can be utilized to solve the social problems that you're describing that don't bring with them the associated problem of gigantism. And like it's been shocking to me to watch the left, especially in the last 6 years, ally itself, for example, with pharmaceutical companies, which was something I'd never thought I would see in my lifetime. I mean, for decades, the only gigantic corporations the left was more skeptical of than the fossil fuel companies were the pharmaceutical companies. And that all seemed to vanish overnight around the COVID time. So I know the story. That's a lot of things to throw at you, but it sort of outlines the territory that we should probably investigate productively.
Yeah, so a couple things. I would say that the current political landscape we have, I think, is less. I understand the concept of conservatives supporting corporations and liberals supporting like large government. I think today the divide we're starting to see more and more is more of like a populist, anti-populist rise, or even like an institutional or anti-institutional rise. So, for instance, I think conservatives today in the United States are largely characterized with, I would say, with populism, in that they're supporting like certain figures, namely right now Donald Trump, who they think alone can kind of like lead them against the corrupt institutions, be them corporate or government. I feel like most conservatives today are not as trustful of big corporations as they were back in like the Bush era, where we would, conservatives would champion, big corporations.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
That's a strange thing, because it makes the modern conservatives a lot more like the 60s leftists.
Potentially, yeah.
I mean, that brings us into the issue, too, of whether the left-right divide is actually a reasonable way of construing the current political landscape at all. And I'm not sure it is, but...
Right now, it kind of is, but only because so many conservatives are following Trump. So, like, your populist, anti-populist thing kind of maps on kind of cleanly to the left and right. It doesn't work with progressives, though, or the far left, because they're also anti-large everything. So, in a surprising way, on very, very far left people, you might find them having a bit more in common with kind of like a MAGA Trump supporter than like a center-left liberal. So, for instance, like both of these groups of people on the very far left will be very dovish on foreign policy, probably a little bit more isolationist. They're not a big fan of like a ton of immigration or a ton of trade with other countries. They might think that there's a lot of institutional capture of both government and corporations. So both all of the MAGA supporters and the far left might think that corporations don't have our best interest at heart and the government is corrupt and captured by lobbyists. You'll see a lot of overlap there.
Right.
I think that sometimes there's a couple things. One is just something I feel like I've discovered. People have no principles. I think that people are largely guided by whatever is kind of satisfying them or making them feel good at the time. I think that's a really important thing to understand, because people's beliefs will seem to change at random. If you're trying to imagine that a belief is coming from some underlying principle or is governed by some internal, like moral or reasonable code or whatever, I think generally there are large social groups that people kind of follow them along from thing to thing, which is why you end up in strange worlds sometimes where, like the position on vaccines and being an anti-vaxxer might have been seen as something, 10 years ago as kind of like a hippie leftist, and now maybe it's more like a conservative, or it's associated more with like MAGA Trump supporters or whatever. I think as a result of how the social groups move around. When it comes to you mentioned this like gigantism thing. That's another thing where I'm not sure if people actually care about gigantism or they're using it as a proxy for other things that they don't like. Like, I could totally imagine.
Well, I care about it.
Sure. Yeah, you might. Yeah, sorry. Just
That's
in
okay.
general.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
Because like I can imagine somebody saying that like they don't trust like a large government, they think there's too much, prone to tyranny or something like that, but also be supportive of an institution like the Catholic Church, which is literally, one guy who is a direct line
Right,
to
but they
God.
can't tax.
Well, I mean,
And they don't have a military.
That
and
is
they can't conscript you.
true.
Right?
Yeah.
And they can't throw you.
I definitely think people definitely just use it to like try and make their absurd fucking position sound more reasonable. It's like, I don't think the fucking mRNA vaccines worked, and I think the fucking myocarditis is gonna kill everyone in 2 years. And someone's like, I don't think that's true. And then they're like, well, so you trust the government, so you trust big corporations, and they try to turn it into that rather than actually talking about what if fucking vaccines work. Jonathan Knight has done psychological studies which show liberals, conservatives, and libertarians have different moral foundations, and there's I've seen some of those things. Yeah, they definitely is a lot of interesting stuff, especially when if you have like literally the way your fucking brain is formed as a child, the way you're raised will have an impact on your fucking political beliefs because it'll shape like your moral intuitions. Yeah.
In jail.
That is true. Yeah. I mean,
Well, those are major and significant. I mean, I get the overlap. Don't get me wrong.
Sure. But I'm saying, like, even if you had a local government, like if you had a state government or a tribe, usually they've got some form of enacting punishment. It'll be sometimes more brutal, but they can throw you in jail. Conscription hasn't existed in the U.S. since the Vietnam War.
Yet.
I mean, yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yet.
So yeah, I think that the Vietnam War.
Yet.
I mean, yeah.
Yet.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Good one, fucking good
So,
one,
yeah,
Jordan.
I think that, I guess when I look at
Let's go back. Well, let's go back to the redistribution issue.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
Oh no.
we pay 65% of our income at, say, upper middle class to upper middle class level in Canada. It isn't obvious to me at all that money is well used. In fact, quite the contrary. In my country now, our citizens make 60% they produce 60% of what you produce in the US. That's plummeted over the last 20 years as state intervention has increased. I'm not convinced that the claim that the interests of people who lack opportunity are best served by state intervention. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, first of all, I'm aware of the relationship between inequality and social problem. There's a very well-developed literature on that, and it essentially shows that the more arbitrary, the broader the reach of inequality in a political institution of any given size, the more social unrest. So where all people are poor, there isn't much social unrest, and where all people are rich, there isn't much social unrest. But when there's a big gap between the two, there's plenty, and that's mostly driven by disaffected young men who aren't very happy that they can't climb the hierarchy. There are barriers in their way. And so there is reason to ameliorate relative poverty. The problem with that, to some degree, is that most attempts to ameliorate relative poverty tend to increase absolute poverty, and they do it dramatically. And the only solution that we've ever been able to develop to that is something approximating a free market system. I wouldn't call it a capitalist system because I think that's capture of the terminology by the radical leftists. It's a free exchange system. And the price you pay for a free exchange system is you still have inequality, but the advantage you gain is that the absolute levels of privation plummet. And I think the data on that they're absolutely conclusive. And that's been especially demonstrated in the radical decrease in rates of poverty.
I understand the point he's making, but like I don't like social democracies like Norway have a lower rate of absolute poverty, right, than the US does. Like there's 600,000 people in America that are homeless, and then there's basically no one. There might be some homeless people in Norway, but there's like practically zero homelessness in Finland. So social democracies seem to do pretty well. I guess if I were to be charitable, I would say striking the balance between reducing relative poverty while not creating more absolute poverty. Oh, Jordan Peterson, Paul Krugman. I don't know, what is Jordan? Does Jordan Peterson even know shit about economics? Allah will awaken people and help them. Yeah, that's true. And help them see the evil that is real in the United States. Dude, that conversation I had with that guy was fucking insane. That's gonna be a killer YouTube video, man.
Poverty since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, because we've lifted more people out of poverty in the last 4 decades than we had in the entire course of human history up to that date. And that's not least because the statist interventionist types who argued for a radical state-sponsored redistribution lost the Cold War, right? And that freed up Africa to some degree, and certainly the Southeast Asian countries, to pursue something like a free trade economy. And that instantly made them rich, even China. So that's an argument, let's say, on the side of free exchange. but it's also an argument, a twofold argument, pointing out how we ameliorate absolute poverty, which should be a concern for leftists, but doesn't seem to be anymore, by the way, and also an argument for the maintenance of a necessary inequality. Like, I'm not sure that inequality can be decreased beyond a certain degree without that decrease causing other serious problems. And we can talk about that, but it's a complicated problem.
Yeah, but for one point of clarification, when you say leftist, what do you mean by that?
Well, I was going with your definition, like essentially the core idea being something like the central problem being one of relative inequality and distribution of resources, and the central solution to that being something like state-sponsored economic intervention. I mean, there's other ways we could define left and right, and we can do that, but I'll stick with the one that you brought forward to begin with.
Gotcha. Okay. I only want to be clear on that because people get mad if I call myself leftist. Oftentimes online or especially in Europe or worldwide, leftists will refer exclusively to like socialists or communists, and anybody to the right of that would be considered like a liberal.
No, usually a fascist.
Well, depending on
very rapidly.
Right.
Yeah. I just want to be clear on that.
Good one, Jordan. True.
Capitalist free market guy. I'm never gonna.
Okay. Well, that's good to get that clear. Why?
Yeah. Because I would argue that when you look at like the fall of the Soviet Union, or you look at the failure of like socialist or communist regimes, I don't know if the issue there was so much redistribution. I think the problem...
That was one of many issues.
I don't think it was an issue at all, actually, I would say. I think the issue was command
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
What do you mean redistribution wasn't an issue? What the hell do you think they did to the kulaks? That was forced redistribution. It resulted in the death of 6 million people. So maybe I'm not understanding what you mean, but that was redistribution at its like pinnacle.
Sure.
And forced redistribution. And it was brutal.
When I think of the strengths of capitalism, the ability for markets to dynamically respond to shifting consumer demand is like the reason why capitalism and free market economies dominate the world. When you've got socialist or communist systems, command economies where a government is trying to say, this is how much this is going to cost, this is how much you're going to produce and make. There's a failed way of managing a state economy. Even in places where they still do it, there are always shadow economies and stuff that were in the Soviet Union that prop up where people try to basically ameliorate the conditions that are resulting from said horrible command economy practices. So I guess in a way you could argue a command economy is kind of like redistribution as a form of it, but...
No, it's a worse problem. If you're pointing to the fact that that's a worse problem, I'm
I would say that's definitely the reason why these places failed, because they just weren't able to respond to changing conditions.
Okay, so what's the difference between us?
Going online without
what the fuck?
What to secure to get
Bro, you got fucking sponsors on this shit?
And economy. So what's
extra 3 months free? That's expressvpn.com.
Bro, they didn't even get... Jordan doesn't even have the time to read it himself. They can't like get an insert of like Jordan Peterson reading it and like fit it dynamically into the conversation. Like they gotta fucking just do this and roll a fucking advert. What the fuck?
/Jordan.
Okay, so what's the difference between a state that attempts to redistribute to foster equality of opportunity and a command economy? Is it a difference of degree? Like, are you looking at models, let's say, like the Scandinavian countries? Or I wouldn't use Canada, by the way, because Canada is now, what would you call it? predicted by economic analysts to have the worst performing economy for the next 4 decades of all the developed world. So maybe we'll just leave the example of Canada off the table.
What would you say to libertarians who say redistribution is planning because markets reward people for contributions, which is an important part of market forces, same as relative prices? I don't know, man. I have to think about that. To libertarians who say redistribution is planning, I think that's it. It's just not what people think of when I think planning. I don't know. It's just not. I don't think it's a good definition of planning. I just want to. I don't know. I don't know how to think about it, but like that's again. I just know what I think of when I think of planning. I understand the point they're making, but I think when people think of planning, they think of not just think of central planning when saying it would be bad on the basis of distorting the market. But that's what I'm like. It's not like when I think of central planning, I don't just think of changing incentives or distorting the market. I think of actual like authoritarian planning of like, this is how, like somebody specific planning, this is how many things we're going to produce. This is how we're going to, this is what prices are going to be. I don't know. Whereas that, it's just I don't know. But I understand like the distortion thing. I don't like distortionary stuff when it comes to the economy. There are obviously market failures in a lot of places. And there are things like natural monopolies. But I'm a massive fan of non-distortionary taxes, man. I mean, talk about a land value tax, destination-based cash flow tax. Value-added tax is still distortionary, but it's administratively a lot easier and doesn't tax business to business transactions in it. I don't know. I Yeah, any redistribution argument, usually I'm just going to resort to like marginal utility, where I'm going to say like, what about income tax? I mean, so I don't like income tax because it's a distortionary tax. If we could have a world without income tax, it'd be fine. But I think there are some cases where the cost or where the benefits of like funding programs with an income tax probably would outweigh the benefits. I would much prefer a world where we started with like a land value tax and a destination-based cash flow tax, and then any money that we needed for essential programs that we couldn't get, we got from an income tax. I don't think income tax should exist before distortionary tax or before non-distortionary taxes exist, basically. But yeah, usually in like redistribution stuff, I'll resort to like marginal utility, or I basically say the money that billionaires have are just like so marginally useless to them, because there's basically no quality in life change between $100 billion and $150 billion, because you already have like everything you could possibly want. So at that point, it probably makes sense, but just based on utility, to redistribute some of that income to poorer people, just because their utility will be so greatly increased, and the billionaires' utility will be so will basically not be diminished at all.
Sure. Scandinavian countries are often the polities that are pointed to by, I would say, by people who, at least in part,
and then also the economy works better if we generally economies work better if people all have like some minimum standard of living where they're all able to like work. Yeah, but I mean, I don't think the level of income tax really affects economic growth that much. That's true. Again, like I'm not like that against income tax or anything. Like I think it's fine. I just wish we had non-distortionary taxes as well. Like there was one study that basically said land value tax could replace income tax in Canada, and it's like, oh well, they should probably do that then. But yeah. Yeah, but like income tax, I don't think income tax is that distortionary. It's not going to distort incentives that much. Yeah, because people aren't going to. It doesn't seem like it's very elastic.
Forward a view of redistribution for purposes of equality of opportunity, like you are, but they're a strange analogy because they're very small countries, and up till now they were very ethnically homogenous. Exactly, and that makes a big difference when you're trying to flatten out the redistribution. Plus, they're also incredibly wealthy, which makes redistribution, let's say, a lot easier. So what's
but we're super wealthy
why
too.
Doesn't the government that's bent on redistribution fall prey to the pitfalls of command economy and forced redistribution for that matter? How do you
corporate? I think again, I think corporate income tax is definitely going to be worse than just regular income tax. But again, like I'm always going to be just like non-distortionary taxes. Which a destination-based cash flow tax is basically a way of doing corporate income tax, but have it be a lot less distortionary. Fuck, I should take more notes on it because I haven't read like a ton into it. But basically it doesn't distort our incentives as much because the government assumes some of the risk as well as some of the reward. The government basically places the government places a bet on the entire economy going up. And the government subsidized losses of businesses equally, and collects on the gains of all businesses equally, and it doesn't distort incentives as much because the government's assuming some of the risk.
I think what you have to do is very, very, very difficult is people get very ideologically captured by both ends, and they feel very, committed, or they feel very allegiant to pushing certain forms of economic organization. And I think sometimes it blinds them to some of the benefits of what exists when you incorporate kind of multiple models, or you call them mixed economies, which is really what every capitalist economy today is. It's some form of free market capitalism combined with some form of like government intervention to control for negative externalities. These are the ways that all economies, even in Scandinavia and the world, work. And I think that recognizing the benefits of both systems are the best way to make case for it.
Fair enough. And the Scandinavian countries seem to have done a pretty good job of that. But like I said, they have a simpler problem to solve, let's say, than the Americans have. Negative externalities. That's an interesting rabbit hole to wander down, because the problem I have with negative externalities, you made a case already that, and again, correct me if I've got this wrong, but I think that I understood what you said. A free market, free exchange economy is a gigantic distributed computational device.
Basically, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Which, funnily enough, one of the big problems for command economies is called the computation problem, because no central body can actually compute, the ins and
right, exactly. Right, that's a fatal problem, right? Because it doesn't have the computational power. It certainly doesn't have the speed of data recognition. It doesn't have the on-the-ground agents if all of the perception and decision-making is centralized, right? It's way too low resolution. It's going to crash. Okay, and I think that that's comprehensible technically as well as ideologically. All right, but having said that, with regards to externalities, all the externalities that a market economy can't compute are so complex that they can't be
Is it going?
determined
It's
centrally by the same
going.
argument. And
There are ways to account for them, though.
Really?
That work
Oh,
really-
thank.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Why is that? Why is Streamlabs still doing that? What the fuck? I fucking thought I disabled this shit. What the hell? What, do you like my follow thing? Oh, I got so many, man. We got twerk break. Can we have a twerk break, chat? Twerk break while I fix my shit. Okay, follow is disabled. Oh, I bet I didn't click save. Disabled. Save. Donations enabled. It's bitches. We can do disabled because I have the other thing set up, right? Disabled. Merge disabled. Subscriptions I should have disabled too because I have my subscription set up on something else. It should just be donations. Okay. Fuck. And then YouTube, I bet I have stuff set up too. Hold on. Don't worry. I'll put. You want some bikini woman on the screen? Okay. Just donations. All right. All right. We're good.
Because
So
I can't see that, because I can't see how that they can be accounted for without the same computational problem immediately arising.
yeah, and I understand that. And I think that's a problem sometimes of people very far on the left when they want to deal with certain problems. I think that they want to bring like heavy-handed, like things like price controls in to say, well, we need less of this, so let's just make this cost this particular thing, which ironically enough introduces a whole other set of externalities that will happen when you get a lot of friction between where your price floor or ceiling is set compared to where market was set at. But ideally, if you're a reasonable person and you view economies as mixed economies, what you try to do is you try to take these externalities, meaning things that aren't accounted for with your primary system. So in a capitalist system, an externality might be something that causes a negative effect, but it doesn't cost you any money. Pollution would be a good example of that. And rather than saying like, well, no company can pollute this much, or if you're a company, you have to use these things because the other things are making too much pollution, all you do is you say, okay, well, if we've determined that, say, carbon is bad for the atmosphere, well, we're just going to attach a little price to that.
Okay,
Government's going to say that, yeah, if you pollute this much, here's the price, and then if you want to pay for it, you can. But that type of intervention in the economy basically allows the free market to hopefully do its job because the government has tacked on a little bit of a price limit that tries to account for the cost of that externality. Yeah.
Great. That's a great example. We can go right down that rabbit hole. Carbon. Okay, so first of all, one of the things I've seen, you tell me what you think about this, something that I've seen that actually shocks me, that I was interested in watching over the last 5 or 6 years. I wondered what would happen when the left, the progressives, ran into a conundrum. And the conundrum is quite straightforward. If you pursue carbon pricing and you make energy more expensive, then you hurt the poor. And I don't think you just hurt them. In fact, I know you don't. You just don't hurt them. I heard a man 2 days ago who's fed 350 million people in the course of his life, heading the UN's largest relief agency, make the claim quite straightforwardly that misappropriation on the part of interventionist governments increased the rate of absolute privation dramatically in the world over the last.
He's not totally wrong, but that's internalizing the cost of pollution. And it's good to internalize a cost because it actually represents the true, because it represents like the true value. The poor people are just paying the cost in dollars rather than paying the cost in pollution. And it's way better to pay the cost in dollars than it is to pay the cost in a fucked up climate, right? Yeah. And then again, like any progressive is going to be for some type of redistribution, some type of welfare or UBI or something to keep the poor people's standard of living at some bare minimum.
Last 4 or 5 years, and that has happened not least because of carbon pricing, not just carbon pricing, but the insistence that carbon per se is an externality that we should control. Now, Germany's paid a radical price for that, for example, so their power is now about 5 times as expensive as it could be, and they pollute.
It's like, I mean, I would be careful citing any energy prices in Europe because a lot of that's going to have to do with the war in Ukraine and not with carbon taxes, but okay.
More per unit of power than they did 10 years ago before they introduced these policies that were hypothetically there to account for externality. And the externality was carbon dioxide. I don't think that's a computable externality. And I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever that it's actually an externality that we should be warping the economic system to ameliorate if the cost of that, and it will be an increase in absolute privation among the world's poor. So here's an additional argument on that front with regards to externalities. You get that wrong, and here's something you could get right instead. if you ameliorate absolute poverty among the world's 1 billion poorest, they take a longer view of the future. And that means they become environmentally aware. And so the fastest route to a sustainable planet could well be the remediation of absolute poverty. And the best route to that is cheap energy. And we're interfering with the development of cheap energy by meddling with the hypothetically detrimental externality of carbon dioxide. And so I think this is a complete bloody travesty, by the way. We are putting the lives of hundreds of millions of people directly at risk right now to hypothetically save people in the future, depending on the accuracy of our projections 100 years out. And these interventionists, these people who are remediating externalities, they actually believe that they can calculate an economic projection 1 century out. That's utterly delusional.
So, okay, so just to be clear, the first thing, I was just giving an example of how you can use like a government intervention to make a free market track something, which is what cap and trade or like carbon taxes would do. I wasn't necessarily speaking to the strength of that individual thing, but
but that's a good thing to focus on.
Yeah, we can focus on that as well.
Externality.
We can focus on that as well. So, the first thing, this is going to sound mean, but I'm very realistic. There needs to be a better argument than just it disproportionately impacts the poor.
That's
not always
a classic leftist argument.
It might be about that.
But it's the same argument you made to justify your swing to the left at the beginning of our discussion. You said that you were looking at economic inequalities that disproportionately affected the poor. So I can't see why. And I'm not trying to be mean about this either. I can't see why you could base your argument that it was morally appropriate for you to swing to the left from your previous position because you saw disproportionate effects on the poor. And I can't use that argument in the situation that I'm presenting it right now.
Well, because it depends on if we think it's a condition that ought to be remedied or not. For instance, if I walk around and I see homeless people, and I'm like, man, this is really sad. We ought to spend more money on homeless people because it seems like they're disproportionately affected by their living conditions. And then somebody says, oh, well, do you think we should still lock up, rapists and murderers? Aren't they disproportionately poor? I'd probably say, well, yeah, we probably should. I go, well, isn't that hypocritical? Well, no, I think that rapists and murderers should probably be in jail, but we can also help the homeless at the same time. I think that just helping the poor isn't an argument, like a blank check to do every possible thing to satisfy poor people.
Right,
it's going to depend on
yeah, that's fine.
So, like, for instance,
because the poor, everyone who's poor is not a victim. Some people who are poor are psychopathic perpetrators, and it's very useful to distinguish them. But I was making a much more specific argument. My argument was that the fastest way out of absolute privation for the world's bottom billion people is through cheap energy.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. So I just work my way towards that.
Yeah.
I just want to say that just because something targets the poor is not necessarily an argument against it.
It depends on how hard it targets them, and it depends on whether mass starvation is the outcome.
The outcome is important. That I agree with. So, for instance, like a sin tax.
The outcome will be mass starvation.
I'm getting to it. I'm getting to it. Okay. Sin taxes on like cigarettes and alcohol are always going to disproportionately impact the poor, or even sugar, we might say, right? But just because that disproportionately impacts the poor, is that a good thing or a bad thing? These are probably the people that suffer the most from those particular afflictions.
Right.
So,
and that is an immediate versus delayed issue too, right? Because the reason,
obesity is an immediate.
I mean, the reason for the tax is to stop people from pursuing a certain form of short-term gratification at the cost of their longer-term well-being.
Correct. And that exact same idea, if you believe climate models, or if you believe that we're heading in a certain direction in terms of climate overall warming the planet, would be the same argument you would make for climate change.
Only if you believe that you could model economic development 100 years into the future.
We're not trying to model. We're more concerned with modeling climate development.
No. We're equally. Tell me how I'm wrong. I don't believe that, because what I see happening is two things. We have climate models that purport to explain what's going to happen over a century on the climate side, but we have economic models layered right on top of those that claim that there's going to be various forms of disaster for human beings economically as a consequence of that climate change. And so that's like...
That's just not... Okay, buddy. We're modeling for the climate in the future, and we can obviously estimate the effects that the climate will have on economies in the future, but we're concerned about the climate part of it. We're concerned about like the natural disasters. We're not doing it just because of the economy, my man.
Like two towers of Babel stacked on top of one another. And so, because if people were just saying, oh, the climate's going to change, there'd be no moral impetus in that. Is the climate's going to change, and that's going to be disastrous for the biosphere and for humanity. But that's an economic argument as well as a climate-based argument.
It's both, but the worst projections of what would happen if the climate took a disastrous turn are worse than the worst projections of what is our planet going to look like economically if we hardcore police.
Right. Why would you? Okay, but I don't understand the distinction between models.
Well, the argument would be that whatever pain and suffering poor people might endure right now because of a move towards green energy, that pain and suffering is going to be short-term and far less than the long-term pain and suffering.
Right, but that's dependent on the integrity of the economic models and the
climate models as well, right?
Exactly, but in exactly the stacked manner that I described it. Like, there's nobody in 1890 who could have predicted what was going to happen in 1990 economically. Not a bit. And if we think we can predict like 50 years out now with the current rate of technology and calculate the potential impact of climate change on economic flourishing for human beings, we're deluded. No one can do that. And then, it's worse. So imagine that as you do that and you project outward, your margin of error increases. That's absolutely, definitely the case. And at some point, you're certainly on the climate side, the margin of error gets rapidly to the point where it subsumes any estimate of the degree to which the climate is going to transform. And that happens even more rapidly on the economic side.
Potentially,
so,
but I think right now, this is a disagreement on the fact of the matter, though, not the philosophy of what we're talking about in terms of controlling externalities. If we think, so I'm curious, let's say that we think we can accurately predict the climate and the economic impact, and we think that the climate impact would be far worse if we don't account for that, both in terms of human conditions.
I don't believe any of those presumptions.
Sure, but then if you don't, but I mean, like, obviously, if I agreed with that factual analysis, I would probably agree with you on the prescription here too, right? And well, none of the climate models were accurate or couldn't accurately predict anything.
They're not sufficiently accurate. That's the first thing. And second, because they have a margin of error, and it's a large margin of error, they don't even model cloud coverage well. That's a big problem. They don't have the resolution. They don't have nearly the resolution to produce the accuracy that's claimed by the climate apocalypse mongers.
People keep saying that, but we just got another one of the hottest years on record. How many times are we going to have another hottest year on record? How many times are we going to have an increase of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere before we're finally like, okay.
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because
I don't know what assumption I could possibly draw from that. I don't know. I don't know because the models aren't accurate. I don't know. God, I hate when he's like this, man. He's smarter than this. I don't understand. God, I just hate it. There's another thing he did. Oh, when he's asked my favorite clip of Jordan Peterson. Oh, I hope I can find it. Oh my God. Oh, please. Yes.
What?
Hold on.
What do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say as the questioner, well, we already know what all those things mean.
Dude, I fucking hate when he's like that so much. Oh my God. It pisses me off so much. God, yeah, it fucking sucks, dude. The only like valid thing in that was like, well, I think asking like, what do you mean God is fair? Because they're gonna be different interpretations of what God is, but oh my fucking God, dude.
The scientific answer to that question depends precisely on the time frame over which you evaluate the climate fluctuation. And that's actually an intractable scientific problem. So you might say, well, if you take the last 100 years, this variation looks pretty dismal. And I'd say, well, what if you took the last 150,000 years? Or the last 10,000 or the last 10 million? You can't specify the damn time frame of analysis.
The time frame is incredibly important. That'd be like saying, look at your, let's say somebody developed cancer and they didn't realize it, and the person has lost, 40 or 50 pounds in the past 6 months. And I was like, you look very sickly. And you're like, okay, well, look at my weight fluctuation over the past 10 years. You say, well, it doesn't really matter. What matters
I'm not saying the time frame isn't important. I'm saying that it is important. Yeah, I'm saying I don't know how to specify it.
Well, you would probably specify with the beginning of the industrial age.
Just implied that it wasn't.
Carbon dioxide is trapping more heat on the planet.
Why is that relevant to the time over which you compute the variability?
Because it seems like as carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere, the surface temperatures have risen at a rate that is a departure from what we'd expect over 150,000 year cycles of temperature variations on the planet.
No, not with that time frame. That's just not the case.
It's absolutely the case.
No, what do you mean? You just flipped to 150,000 year time span.
What I'm saying is that if we expect to see a temperature do this in a 150,000 year time span, in a 100 year time span, seeing it do this, that's very worrying.
Now, you mean like Michael Mann's hockey stick, the one that's under attack right now in court by a major statistician who claimed that he falsified his data. I mean, that's spike.
Oh my God.
I'm talking about the record temperatures that have been declared for like the past 5 years that have also increased with the concentration of parts per million of carbon dioxide of the atmosphere. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that every model is perfect.
They're
but
not
right
perfect.
Now, sure, but right now we're like standing in traffic with our eyes closed saying the car hasn't hit me yet, so I don't think there's any coming. I think it's pretty undeniable at this point that there is an impact on climate across the planet.
I think that's highly deniable. We have no idea what the impact is from. We don't know where the carbon dioxide is from. We can't measure.
Oh my God, Jordan, please.
Temperature records going back 100 years.
Oh, Jordan, please.
Temperature detection sites were first put outside urban areas, and then you have to correct. Then you have to correct for the movement of the urban areas, and then you introduce an error parameter that's larger than the purported increase in temperature that you're planning to measure. This isn't data. This is guess, and there's something weird underneath it. There's something weird that isn't oriented well towards human beings underneath it. It has this guise of compassion. Oh, we're going to save the poor in the future. It's like that's what the bloody communists said, and they killed a lot of people doing it, and we're walking down that same road now. With this insistence that, we're so
That's so true, bro. Carbon tax is literally communism, bro. Oh my God, dude. This guy, dude. He makes me so fucking frustrated, dude.
Poor 100 years from now. And if we have to wipe out several hundred million of them now, well, that's a small price to pay for the future utopia. And we've heard that sort of thing before. And the alternative to that is to stop having global level elites plot out a utopian future or even an anti-dystopian future. And that's exactly what's happening now with organizations like the WEF. And if this wasn't...
Dude, they were talking about a carbon tax. And his argument was, well, it might disproportionately hit the poor. It's like, oh my, and now he's fucking talking about, well, that's what the communist said, bro. He's probably thinking about weather modification, tech, not global warming. True. I don't know what he's on, man. The benzos made him crazy, dude.
Immediately impacting the poor in a devastating manner. I wouldn't care about it that much, but it is. You know, I watched over the course of the last 5 years, the estimates of the number of people who were in serious danger of food privation rise from about 100 million to about 350 million. That's a major price to pay for a little bit of, what would you say, for progress on the climate front that's so narrow it can't even be measured.
I don't think the increase in hungry people in the planet is because of climate policies.
Why not?
Because I don't think that countries in Africa are being pushed away from fossil fuels. I mean, most developing
of course they are. They can't even get loans from the World Bank to pursue fossil fuel development. And there's plenty of African leaders who
I'm pretty sure the World Bank gives them loans to produce green development. I'm pretty sure that we have literally made fucking programs. I wasn't saying he was wrong. A lot of people think that tech is not real. What the hell, bro? Are you fucking? God damn it! I got fucking trolls in my chat again. I need I don't. What was I saying? What was Jordan saying?
Screeching
policies.
Why not?
Because I don't think that countries in Africa are being pushed away from fossil fuels. I mean, most
the World Bank definitely has programs to lend countries to build green energy, just like it does to Green Energy World Bank loans. Green loans definitely have the trouble. Green loan is so much a green bond, or raise the capital for green eligible projects. I don't know. Seems like they started doing loans for green shit, green energy.
Of course they are. They can't even get loans from the World Bank to pursue fossil fuel development. And there's plenty of African leaders who are screeching at the top of their lungs about that because the elites in the West have decided that, well, it was okay for us to use fossil fuel so that we wouldn't have to starve to death and our children had some opportunities. Yeah. But maybe the starving masses that are too large a load for the world anyways shouldn't have that opportunity. Yeah, and that's direct policy exactly from the UN, fostered by organizations like the WEF. They're going to have to turn to
the
renewables.
World Economic Forum, bring that in here too, man.
Because renewables have no energy density. Besides that, they're not renewable and they're not environmentally friendly. And then one more thing. There's one more weird thing underneath all of this.
Okay.
Well, let's say if carbon dioxide was actually your bugbear and it was genuine. Well, then why wouldn't the Greens, for example, in Africa, the progressives, be agitating to expand the use of nuclear energy? Especially because Germany has to import it anyways, especially because France has demonstrated that it's possible. We could drive down the cost of energy with low-cost nuclear, and there'd be no carbon production. And then the poor people would have something to eat because they'd have enough energy. And that isn't what's happening. And that's one of the things that makes me extremely skeptical of the entire narrative. It's like two things. The left will sacrifice the poor to save the planet. And the left will deindustrialize even at the nuclear level.
Okay, I don't understand. Sacrifice the poor. Like the poor are also going to die if the planet dies, right? In fact, the poor are going to die sooner when the fucking planet dies. Yeah, I understand the point he's trying to make, but an externality tax makes the prices reflect the actual cost of the pollution that they're causing. It internalizes the negative cost, right? It makes the price reflective of the true cost. It's not for no point. It's better to pay the cost into dollar value than it is to pay the cost into fucking world is sinking, sea levels rising cost.
The fact that it devastates the poor. And that's even worse because if you devastate the poor and you force them into a short-term orientation, in any given country where starvation beckons, for example, they will cut down all the trees and they will kill down all the animals and they will destroy the ecosphere. And so even by the standards of the people who are pushing the carbon dioxide externality control, all the consequences of that doctrine appear to me to be devastating even by their own measurement principles. We're trying to fix the environment. Well, boys and girls, doesn't look like it's working. All you've managed to do is make energy 5 times as expensive and more polluting. You were wrong. That didn't work. And I can't understand. You can help me. That's why you're here to be talking to me. I can't understand how the left can support this.
Just one quick thing. Let's say that everything you've said is true. What do you think is the plan then? What is the goal? What is the drive? Like, why push obviously horrible ideas for the planet and the poor?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Well, because you're positive, right? So what do you think is the driver goal?
Well, I listen to what people say. Here's the most terrible thing they say. There are too many people on the planet.
Oh my God.
So who says that? I've heard people say that for
Bro, I don't even know. I'm pretty sure the right are more obsessed with overpopulation than the left is, man. I'm pretty sure especially like the progressive left will be like, overpopulation is a total myth. It's all capitalism's fault. It's all capitalism's fault. It's because capitalism can't distribute the goods properly. Which there's some truth to that, by the way. There are genuine distribution problems caused by fucking capitalism, and it doesn't respond correctly to the demand in lower income places. But holy fucking shit, bro. Pretty sure if any of these people are more obsessed with Malthus and fucking Malthusian shit, it's the right.
30 years. Perfectly ordinary, compassionate people. Well, there's too many people on the planet. And I think, well, for me, that's like hearing Satan himself take possession of their spine and move their mouth. It's like, okay, who are these excess people that you're so concerned about? And exactly who has to go and when and why and how? And who's going to make that decision? And even if you're not consciously aiming at that, you are the one who uttered the words. You're the ones who muttered the phrase. What makes you think that the thing that possessed you to make you utter that words isn't aiming at exactly what you just declared? And so that's a terrible vision. But when you look at what happens in genocidal societies.
Oh, what? No, Jordan, no, please, Jordan, no, please, do not make the climate, do not turn a carbon tax into genocide, please.
And they emerge with fair regularity, and usually with a utopian vision at hand. The consequence is the mass destruction of millions of people. So why should I assume that something horrible isn't lurking like that right now, especially given that we have pushed a few 100 million people back into absolute poverty when we were doing a pretty damn good job of getting rid of that? And I just don't understand what's happening in Germany or in the UK. Like, it's insane. Like, look, man, if they would have got rid of the nuclear plants and made energy 5 times as expensive, and the consequence would have been they weren't burning lignite coal as a backup.
Bro, there's only, like, there's opposition to nuclear power from people on the left, and I think that those people are dumb. I think it's bullshit. I think nuclear power is good. But again, it seems like there's also, like, opposition to nuclear power seems to be a thing across the political spectrum. It doesn't seem to be particularly ideological. I don't, in my experience, people on the right seem to be more opposed to it. I don't like, yeah. Jesus, man, I don't understand. And there's definitely nuclear power plants in Germany. Like, I think the US doesn't do as many as Germany and France do.
And their unit production of energy, pollution per unit of energy had plummeted. You could say, well, look, we hurt a lot of poor people, but at least the air is cleaner. It's like, no, air's worse and everyone's poorer. So, like, explain to me how the hell the left can be anti-nuclear.
Okay.
I don't understand it at all.
Gotcha. All right. This is something that I brought up earlier that is concerning to me. I feel like when people get political beliefs, I feel like what happens is, what we think happens, what we hope happen is you have some moral or philosophical underpinning. And then from...
Sorry, hold on. I don't know, power plant in Ukraine has been a scary thing, so if we went all in and had a bunch of them. Chernobyl, you mean? But Chernobyl was in the 80s and it was managed by the Soviet Union. I understand it was scary, but I think there's been some fucking studies that, like, even factoring in the deaths from Chernobyl, no, what do you mean no? Even factoring in the deaths for Chernobyl, it seems like it's still fucking better, like, even deaths-wise, because of the deaths you get from, like, coal mining and from manufacturing fucking windmills.
There, you combine this with some epistemic understanding of the world, and then you
the Ukraine-Russia war currently. What do you mean? Do you mean Chernobyl being taken over by the Russians in the war? Ukraine got Chernobyl back, right? Or do they still not have it back yet? Chernobyl, Ukraine, taken over. Was it taken back? Now Chernobyl is back under Ukrainian control. Yeah, it's back under. Yeah, I don't really it can be scary. That is true. If people are fucking worried that they would try to use Chernobyl as a weapon, largest active plant there is now, Chernobyl's not active. Did Russia take over an active nuclear power plant? I never read about that, but I'm sure they did. I remember people were worried about them using nuclear power plants as a weapon because they could, like, blow it up. Not there 1 sec.
Combine these two things, you engage in some form of analysis, and your moral
nice if that was true.
You start to apply, like, prescriptions. So maybe I'm religious, maybe I analyze society and I see that particular TV shows lead to premarital sex. So my societal prescriptions, we should ban these TV shows, right? Ideally, this is how you would imagine this process works. What I find happens, unfortunately, all too often is what people...
By the way, chat, just real quick. Chat, please. Chat, I need followers. Chat, please. Chat, I beg of you. Chat, please. I see my viewers. Chat, I need them. Thank you. I need them. I'm grinding to Twitch affiliate, man. Thanks to everyone for watching, but I need followers right now, man. I need them. Tweet, please. I will give you so many twerk breaks for followers, please. Please, chat. Look at them, man. Chat, look at She-Hulk. Ukraine operates 4 nuclear power plants with 15 reactors located in, so are you saying you're just concerned that, like, during war, they'll get damaged and stuff? I don't know. That can be a valid concern, I guess. Because they definitely are more dangerous if mismanaged, and like especially during war. Russians have shelled it. Oh shit, yeah. I don't know though. Like it seems like I want to be concerned about that I want to be concerned about that in NATO countries. Quite frankly, I like the idea of a NATO country going to war with a country that would actually be willing to shell within NATO. Oh, fuck, my wolf died already. Within NATO countries, I don't think that's really going to happen.
People do is they join social groups, and then with those social groups, they inherit something that I call like a constellation of beliefs. And this constellation of beliefs, instead of rationally building on each of these, you basically get this like Jenga tower that is like floating over a table, and every block is like supporting itself, and no real part of the tower can be addressed. If you pull out one piece, it all falls apart.
Right.
So
by the way, one more thing. There's a public Minecraft server, ! Minecraft in the chat, and you can join if you want to.
Very stuck in all of this combined constellation stuff, and none of it is really given like any analysis, and you can't really push anybody from one way or another in terms of like reevaluating any of the beliefs that are part of this constellation. I wish I would have.
That's fine. That's right.
Oh my god, he got another fucking advert. Oh my god, Jordan, what the fuck?
Of our get up to be.
Bro, if you're gonna put 2 fucking adverts in your shit, at least film it yourself. Bro, what the fuck?
That's fine. That's right. Well, you know, there are models now of cognitive processing, belief system processing that make the technical claim that what a belief system does is constrain entropy.
Sure, that's not surprising at all.
Okay, so and now the signal for released entropy, which would be a consequence of, say, violated fundamental beliefs, is a radical increase in anxiety, right, and a decrease in the possibility of positive emotion. And so people will struggle very hard against that, which is exactly the phenomena that you're describing. Yeah. Okay, I agree with what you said. Although,
so here's my
so I'm not sure why it's relevant to the issue I was pursuing.
I'm getting it. Here's my issue. Okay, so. When I'm trying to evaluate a situation, I like to think that I have I've got some insulation from the effects of what liberals think or what conservatives think, because on my platform, I don't necessarily have an allegiance to a particular political ideology. Like right now, I'm like center left to progressive, but I break really hard from progressive on certain issues. I think Kyle Rittenhouse is in the right. I think basically everything you guys are doing with indigenous people is insane, including the complete mass grave hoax. I think that I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment. I have beliefs where I can break from my side, pretty hardcore because I am not like allegiant to a certain political ideology. One thing that worries me with this constellation of beliefs thing is that sometimes when it comes to evaluating a particular policy or a particular problem, I feel like it's part of the constellation, and sometimes it inhibits people from like taking a step back and reasonably thinking about the issue. So when we're talking about climate change, you mentioned the WEF sacrificing tons of people, the UN, global elites, 5 times energy costs in Germany, genocidal people. I feel like this is part of like a whole thing where it's like, okay, well, let's take a quick step back and let's just like think rationally about this particular issue for one moment. Okay.
Well, you asked me what the motivation for anti-poor policies might be, so that's why I was.
Well, I did, but I got all of those things before I even asked that question, because I think it's totally possible that somebody.
Bro, I did anti-poor policies like a fucking carbon tax. Jesus fucking. Yeah, I understand. I don't like again. I understand he doesn't believe in any of the models, but like, if you believe them, it's not really anti-poor because you'd rather them pay the dollar cost than this cost to the environment.
Might say, okay, well, when you put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it seems to cause an increase in surface temperatures. This has been happening from about the 1800s, and as we started to track surface temperatures, whether the thermometer is on top of the Empire State Building or in the middle of the field, it seems like there's an average rise in temperatures, and people all around the world are observing this. In some places more than others. If you live in Seattle and 20 years ago your apartment building wasn't built with air conditioner units, you feel that now. If you live in a place in London and you've never had an air conditioner before, now that's not acceptable. I think the people on the ground.
No, carbon tax is my stance. Why? Carbon tax is literally like one of the best taxes you could do, because it's a tax directly on a negative externality. Like, I guess if you are like Jordan Peterson and fucking believe in climate change, then
when they look in labs can see changes. It might be that some models aren't precise enough, and it might be that for reasons we don't even understand.
Well, the economic models certainly aren't precise enough.
Sure, maybe that might be true.
Maybe they can't even use them to predict the price of a single stock for 6 months. The economic models are not sufficiently accurate to calculate out
I don't know what the fuck economic model is. No one is trying to like specifically model the economies like 100 years from now. What they're saying is that if if climate change continues happening, there will be natural disasters, which will have negative effects on the economy. I don't know. Maybe there's like some specific models where people try to estimate like the specific cost of those natural disasters. In which case, I would say, yeah, that does seem kind of bullshit because there's no way you could possibly know. But like, I just don't get it because what the fuck? Like, obviously, there's going to be negative effects on the economy if increased natural disasters. We are taxed enough. I don't like. But an externality tax is a tax that makes markets work better. Yeah, like it's a good type of tax. I don't necessarily disagree that we're taxed enough. I think there are a lot of tax reforms that need to happen. I think income tax should probably be reduced, and we should probably get a land value tax, and corporate income tax definitely needs to be reduced or gotten rid of, and we should replace it with a destination-based cash flow tax. Yeah, but I think we need less distortionary taxes, and then we need to find a way to make our welfare spending more efficient. My ears? What's wrong with your ears? Was I just yelling?
The consequences of climate change over a century.
I like the comparison because economic models can't predict individual stocks, but they do predict the rough rise of the market. If you invest in the S&P 500, you get
cataclysmic collapse.
No, even with the cataclysmic collapse accounted for, you're going to see about 7% returns on average with inflation over a long period of time.
I wouldn't call an average a very sophisticated model analogous to climate change.
That's the difference between climate and weather, though, right? Is that climate isn't going to tell you what the temperature is on a given day, but it might tell you the average surface temperature over a period of 1 year or 10 years. And then that's the difference between climate and weather. That's the difference between like the market and stuff. It is a hypothetical, but again, we're seeing more and more data every single year.
Okay, so let's jump out of our cloud of presuppositions for a minute.
Sure.
Now, one of the things that...
Before you do that, because I want to say, there are some things that we've gotten as a result of investing in green energy that have been good. So for instance, the power of solar energy has dropped dramatically in the United States, faster than anybody thought possible, such that solar energy is like competitive or beating fossil fuels in certain areas. As long as you can set the solar panels up, you're literally beating fossil fuels.
And as long as the sun is shining.
Well, it still is, but we're not a nuclear winter yet.
But it isn't when it's cloudy. And
that's why I said depending on where you live. There are places...
Bro, oh my god. It's such a stupid, dumb-ass fucking point. Oh, well, we made investments in solar, and now solar is beating fossil fuels. But sometimes it's cloudy. Okay, but that doesn't change anything I fucking said, because the fucking benefits still outweigh the costs there. Like, it's just totally fucking missing the point. Like, obviously, it's cloudy sometimes. People are gonna weigh that decision when they do shit. His point was just investing in green energy made it cheaper, made it more efficient. It made it better. Yeah, and it seems like we're having positive effects on the environment because of that.
Equatorial place, if you're trying to set up a solar panel in Seattle, you might not have as much luck, or New York City might not have as much, or in Germany. True.
Canada.
There are also other issues that are coming up that I think are obfuscating our ability to evaluate what's being caused by green energy versus not. When we look at energy increases in Germany, I think there's a similar constellation around nuclear energy, for instance. People don't want nuclear energy because they think of nukes, and they think of nuclear meltdowns, and they think of Chernobyl, and they think of Fukushima, and they think of atomic bombs, and that's it. And that's stupid. And I agree with you. But nuclear energy is a totally viable alternative to other forms of...
Then why does the radical left oppose it? You think it's just this...
For the same reason the right opposes vaccines, because it sounds scary and it's a big thing and they don't trust it.
The right has a reason to distrust vaccines in the aftermath of the COVID debacle. Well, because they were imposed by force.
You get to choose if you have a nuclear power plant? That's imposed by force too, no? You don't get to choose where your energy comes from if you live in a country. You turn the light switch and hopefully you don't have a Chernobyl that melts down in your particular town, right?
Well, you get to choose it because you can buy it or not.
Well,
that's the choice.
Nobody
had a choice with the vaccines.
Nobody had a choice whether or not they live near Chernobyl or not. Nobody's a choice. There's a nuclear power plant. Well, how really? You have to move like 500 miles. That's like telling conservatives.
It's literally like you we're not forced to get the COVID vaccine. There was definitely coercion involved, right? Because it was like, you might lose your job if you don't get it, right? But that's the fucking same thing as saying, well, if you move away.
When Biden tried to do the OSHA mandate for vaccines, you just get a different job, right?
I don't want to debate about whether or not large nuclear power plants are frightening. They are. Sure, okay. And there are technologies now where that's not a problem. So I think that's a counterproductive place for our discussion to go, because I also understand why people are afraid of it. But what I don't understand, for example, is why the Germans shut down their nuclear power plant.
Fuck, I just realized I'm not recording. God damn it. I forgot to hit start recording. Oh my God, I'm so fucking dumb.
And the Californians are thinking and doing the same thing when they have to import power from France anyways. Like, it's completely...
Or burn coal, which is a million times worse.
Not just coal, lignite.
Yeah.
Right. And then with regards to these renewable power sources, they have a number of problems. One is they're not They're not energy dense. They require tremendous infrastructure to produce. They might be renewable at the energy level, but they're not renewable at the raw materials level. So that's a complete bloody lie. They're insanely variable in their power production. And because of that, you have to have a backup system, and the backup system has to be reliable without variability. And that means if you have a renewable grid, you have to have a parallel fossil fuel or coal grid to back it up when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, which is unfortunately very, very frequently. And so again, and I'm not going to say there's no place for renewable energy like solar and wind, because maybe there are specific niche locales where those are useful. But the logical what would you say, antidote to the problem of reliability, if we're concerned about carbon, but we're really not, would be to use nuclear. And the Greens haven't been like flying their bloody flags for 30 years saying, well, we could use fossil fuels for fertilizer and feed people, and we could use nuclear power to drive energy costs down in a carbon dioxide-free manner. That seems pretty bloody self-evident to me. And so then it brings up this other mystery that we were talking about earlier. You know, what's the impetus behind all this? Because the cover story is, oh, we care about carbon dioxide, which I don't think they do, especially given the willingness to sacrifice the poor. It makes no sense to me. And I think it's relevant to the issue you brought up, which is that people have these constellations of ideas, and there's a driving force in the midst of them, so to speak. They're not necessarily aware of what that driving force is.
Isn't it more likely that people are either misinformed or misguided than people are legitimately trying to depopulate the planet?
Look, misinformed and ignorant, that's plenty relevant and worth considering. And stupidity is always a better explanation than malevolence. But malevolence is also an explanation. And no, I don't think it's a better explanation, because
why would we waste so much money sending food aid, having Bush do programs through Africa for AIDS, having other billionaires like Bill Gates invest so much money in anti-malarial stuff? Like, why would all the global elites be so invested in helping and killing the people here at the same time?
Well, some of it's confusion.
Okay.
And some of it's the fact, many things can be happening simultaneously with a fair bit of internal paradox, because people just don't know which way is up often. But the problem with the argument, okay, so you tell me what you think about this.
Mm-hmm.
So, Hitler's cover story was that he wanted to make the glorious Third Reich and elevate the Germans to the highest possible status for the longest possible period of time. Okay, but that wasn't the outcome. The outcome was that Hitler shot himself through the head after he married his wife, who died from poison the same day, in a bunker underneath Berlin while Europe was in flames. Well, he was insisting that the Germans deserved exactly what they got because they weren't the noble people he thought they were. And then you might say, well, Hitler's plans collapsed in flames, and wasn't that a catastrophe? Or you could say that was exactly what he was aiming for from the beginning, because he was brutally resentful and miserable right from the time he was, a rejected artist at the age of 16. And so he was working, or something was working within him, and something that might well be regarded as demonic, whose end goal was precisely what it attained, which was the devastation of hundreds of millions of people, and Europe left in a smoking ruin.
Sorry. If he wants to go into tax, I'll move on. An externality tax is literally like the best tax you could do. Like, I don't understand.
And the cover story was the Grand Third Reich. And so there's no reason at all to assume that we're not in exactly the same situation right now.
I think there's a great reason to assume. I think that Hitler's motives and everything he was trying to do wasn't a secret. I don't think that anybody had to guess that he was incredibly anti-Semitic, that his Aryan supremacy was going to lead to the destruction and the murder of so many different people in concentration camps. Like, none of this was a secret. It's not like he was hiding it. He tried to maybe hide the death camps, but nobody in Germany was wondering, like, wow, crazy the pogroms are happening against Jewish people. That's so crazy. Or wow, they're all being shipped to just mainly the Jews to camps to work. Like, that's kind of interesting. Or wow, he talks about this a lot in Mein Kampf, but maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't think you can compare like Hitler to people that are worried about climate change. The worry that I have here is because if we're applying this,
people in Germany thought Hitler was perfectly motivated by the highest of benevolence.
Oh my God.
If I were to take this standard of evidence and apply this lens of analysis.
Yeah, I saw that clip on Twitter. I don't think you can compare Hitler to people who's worried about climate change. Why not? Oh my God. Jesus, Jordan. I hate it so much.
Couldn't I say the exact same thing about the conservative constellation of belief? They don't want to intervene anywhere in the world because they don't care about the problems there. They're anti-immigration because they hate brown people. Trump wanted to ban Muslims from coming to the United States because he's xenophobic. Conservatives don't want to have taxes to help the poor because homeless people starve and die in the winter. But I feel like
some of that's true. And yes, you can adopt that criticism. I think the difference with regards especially to the libertarian side of the conservative enterprise, but also to some degree to the conservative enterprise, is they're not building a central, gigantic organization to put forward this particular utopian claim. And so even if the conservatives are as morally addled as the left,
I don't know. If I look up Project 2025, it seems like there is a plan by conservatives to try to fill the fucking state with loyalists and institute their fucking bullshit shit. I don't know, man. Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't stand it. Like, Jordan Peterson is weird because he straddles the line between IRL world and online culture. He's definitely. It's weird because he's both like mainstream, and Paul Krugman is completely in normie IRL world. Yeah. I know. I mean, Paul Krugman uses Twitter a little bit, and he gets on Twitter fights sometimes. Yeah, I don't know. Like it. Jordan Peterson is weird in that way because he definitely is mainstream-ish, but he's also like, Destiny's been trying to break out of online stuff a little bit, but yeah, Jordan Peterson is definitely still like mainstream, but also in like the intellectual dark web, right? So yeah, it's weird when you when people are like that. Sam Harris is like the same way.
And to some degree, that might be true. They're not organized with the same gigantism in mind. And so they're not as dangerous at the moment. Now, they could well be, and they have been in the past, but at the moment they're not.
I bet, and I
so,
doubt
of course,
he
you can
knows
be
he's going to
skeptical
Peterson or Sam
about people's
Harris.
motivations when they're
He
brandishing
probably
these
knows
things.
who they are.
Why would
I
we
would
say that they're not as
imagine he
concerned with
knows
the gigantism? I
those
feel like
two.
everybody is when it's
Jordan
particularly what they
Peterson
care about.
Sam Harris.
You mean whether they would be inclined in that direction?
For sure. Conservatives wield the power of the government whenever they feel they need to, just as liberals do. Right? Conservatives were very happy to see, for instance, abortion was brought back as a state-regulated thing.
That's a good objection. I think that you're correct in your assumption that once people identify a core area of concern, they're going to be motivated to seek power to implement that concern.
I think cancel culture is a good idea too. I think conservatives, prior to the 2000s, if they could censor everything related to either LGBT stuff or weird musical stuff, or so that they don't want their kids to watch, conservatives would do it. But now that you see that like liberals and progressives are kind of wielding that corporate hammer, now conservatives are very much, well, hold on, we need freedom of speech, we need to platform everybody. And now progressives are like, well, hold on, maybe we shouldn't platform people.
I got no disagreement with those things that you said, and I have no disagreement about your proposition that people will seek power to impose their...
Oh, wait, what the fuck? Hold on. Did somebody boost my server? What the hell? No, they didn't. Why did Discord lie to me then? Oh, but sample text is here now.
Their central doctrine. Okay, so then you might say, and so we can have a very serious conversation about that. What do we have that ameliorates that tendency?
In the United States, we've got hopefully a form of decentralized government. I can't speak to Canada as much, but
yes, that's true. So that's one of the institutional protections against that, because what that does is put various.
You're weird because you know IRL people, but you are completely online. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You know, I'm just glad I know IRL people. I am completely online though, but yeah.
Right, and so that's a very intelligent solution. But then there are psychological and philosophical solutions as well. And one of them might be that you abjure the use of power, right, as a principle. And so, and this is one of the things that was done very badly during the COVID era, let's say, because the rule should be something like, you don't get to impose your solution on people using compulsion and force. There's a doctrine there, which is any policy that requires compulsion and force is to be looked upon with extreme skepticism. Now, it's tricky because now and then you have to deal with psychopaths, and they tend not to respond to anything but force. And so there's an exception there that always has to be made, and it's a very tricky exception. But look, let me tell you a story, and you tell me what you think about this, because I think it's very relevant to the concern that you just expressed. And I don't believe that the conservatives are necessarily any less tempted by the call.
Oh my God, Jitty Alex, not right now, dude. Not right now, dude. Because he's not considering his trying to taxpayer, dude. I went over the fucking go look up PPF curve, human capital shifters, and go look up Cato Institute price elasticity of the population. All right, man. That's all I gotta say to that right now. We can talk more about that later, dude.
Of power than the leftists. That's going to vary.
Actually, Cato Institute not only has the price elasticity to population, which shows that time prices fall as the population increases, but that's all. A lot of studies that show immigrants don't actually use more welfare than native citizens.
From situation to situation. Though I would say probably overall in the 20th century, the leftists have the worst record in terms of sheer numbers of people killed. So,
I mean, it depends on how we're quantifying
not
that.
really. Okay, we'll just quantify Mao. How's that? Direct death of 100 million people. So, that's a pretty stark fact. And if we're going to argue about that, well, then we're really not going to get anywhere.
Fake news,
so,
true.
I'm not disagreeing that the Holodomor happened as well. The Soviet Union and China were horrible. I'm not going to
it's a war of...
I'm just saying, for World War II, it depends on how much you attribute the war does to Nazi Germany, et cetera. But sure, like, largely speaking, I don't think that the left beat the right because the right wasn't trying. I don't think it's because Hitler's lack of trying led him to kill less people than who ended up dying during the Great Leap Forward or during the industrialization of the
Yes, well, I also think it's an open question still to what degree Hitler's policies were right-wing versus left-wing, and no one's done the analysis properly yet to determine that.
Well,
because there was a national socialist movement for a reason, and the socialist part of it wasn't accidental.
Well, but there was no, cooperatively formed.
I don't know. The Young Turks are definitely online, but they're arguably like more the like mainstream online stuff. They definitely used to be more mainstream online people when they were really popular, and now they're not as big anymore. It seems like
businesses that were owned by all of the people for the people and distributed to the people. And I don't think redistribution was high on Hitler's list of things to do.
That's true. It was a strange mix of totalitarian policy.
I don't think it was a strange mix. I think it was a bid to appeal to mid-left, etc., like the KPD and the German Socialist Party by calling themselves National Socialists. I think it was very much like an authoritarian, ultra-nationalist regime that pretty squarely fits with. People get mad if you call something far right or far left because they have I
know the Amazing Atheist. I like some of his stuff.
University of Toronto would have been to extract out a random sample of Nazi policies and strip them of markers of their origin and present them to a set of people with conservative or leftist beliefs and see who agreed with them more. And that analysis has never been done as far as I know. So we actually don't know. And we could know if the social scientists would do their bloody job, which they don't, generally speaking. That's something we could know. We could probably use the AI systems we have now, the large language models, to determine to what
Bro, dude, it's impossible to know whether Hitler was right wing or left wing without using ChatGPT, bro. Thanks, Jordan.
Left and right beliefs intermingled in the rise of National Socialism. So that's all technically possible. So, and it hasn't been done, so it's a matter of opinion.
Sure,
so,
I don't necessarily disagree. But that's something you could do.
Okay, so I was going to tell you this story. Okay, well, this has to do with the use of power. So I spent a time with a group of scholars putting and analyzing the Exodus story, an Exodus seminar recently. And so the Exodus story is a very interesting story because it's a what would you say? It's an analysis of the central tendency of movement away from tyranny and slavery. That's a good way of thinking about it. So the possibility of tyranny and the possibility of slavery are possibilities that present themselves to everyone within the confines of their life, psychologically and socially. You can be your own tyrant with regards to the imposition of...
Bro, they're supposed to be talking about a carbon tax right now.
Doctrines that you have to abide by and punish yourself brutally whenever you deviate.
Yeah, Joe Rogan.
We all contend with the issue of tyranny and slavery. And
Joe Rogan's weird.
There's an alternative path, and that's what the Exodus story lays out. And Moses is the exemplar of that alternative path, although he has his flaws. And one of his flaws is that he turns too often to the use of force. So he kills an Egyptian, for example, an Egyptian noble who has slayed a one of Moses' Hebrew slave brothers, and he has to leave. There's a variety of...
You think Jordan Peterson is one of these people that try... dude, I'm gonna pull up that clip again. The fucking, God damn it. The problem is, I think Jordan Peterson is pretty intelligent. I think especially, I mean, this is like the meme, right? That everyone says, but he was like, as a professor, like he was like fine a lot of times, but, then he just does shit like this.
Do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say as the question.
Like, it's like, like, I don't know what he was trying to do there, man. I don't know if he was trying to sound profound or not, or if he was, like, I literally don't know what he was trying to do there. Like, I listened to some of his talks with Sam Harris, and it's like, I don't agree with Sam Harris on everything, and I think Jordan Peterson can make some good points, but holy shit, he doesn't answer questions sometimes, and he is just incoherent sometimes. It's like, I don't know if he's trying to sound profound, and I don't know what he's doing. Like, I don't know what he's doing. Well, whatever he discusses, psychology, sure, but he's so crazy. But yeah, like, oh my god, and like literally in here they were like just trying to talk about like a carbon tax, and it's like, and Jordan Peterson turns it into fucking genocide, and it's like there's a fair point to be made that like, oh well, I think it's kind of weird that like the left seems to want a carbon tax, but the left also seems to care about the poor, and a carbon tax disproportionately affects the poor. It's like, okay, well, there's some conversation to be had there, but then you get into like, the left is trying to sacrifice the poor based on bullshit models of the weather, and it's like, dude, just if you want to say like it's interesting that sometimes the left-wing people seem to be okay if a carbon tax, you know, it impacts the poor disproportionately. Like, you didn't try and say that, but like you try to turn it into this fucking crazy genocidal overpopulation WEF UN thing conspiracy, and it's like, okay, fuck off, dude. Yeah, I don't know. And again, like, it's better that it's like a externality tax is a good tax. Yeah, it's better the poor people pay the cost in dollars of carbon than the cost in fucking climate change. And yeah,
he uses his staff, he uses his rod, and he uses power when he's supposed to use persuasion and legal or verbal invitation and argumentation. And this happens most spectacularly right at the end of the sojourn. So Moses has spent 40 years leading the Israelites through the desert, and he's right on the border of the promised land. And really, what
I honestly think it's a positive, dude. I think I already told you this. It was either you or someone else, or probably you, because you're like one of my only viewers. The fucking Gaza expired food thing did black pill me on disinformation so much. Like, my own friends, like, were like just totally bought into like we airdropped expired food in Gaza, and it was just bullshit, and we didn't do it. It was just all misinformation. There were 2 clips that were both proven to be fake. And MREs don't even have expiration dates. They have a manufacture date, but they don't even have expiration dates. It was insane. It was wild. It was, dude, that blew my fucking mind.
Fundamental basis is that he's
oh man, just wait till I get talking. Oh man,
what he's been aiming at, what he's devoted his whole life to. And he's been a servant of that purpose in the highest order. And that Israelites are still in the desert, which means they're lost and confused. They don't know which way is up. They're still slaves. And now they're dying of thirst, which is what you die of, spiritual thirst, if you're sufficiently lost. And they go to Moses and
ask
him to intercede.
I'll let him keep going.
Moses to speak to the rocks
so
that they'll reveal the water within. And Moses strikes the rocks with his rod twice instead, right? He uses force. And so God says to him, you'll now die before you enter the promised land. It's Joshua who enters and not Moses. Okay, and you might wonder why I'm telling you that story. I'm telling you that story because those concepts at the center of that cloud of concepts that you described are stories, right? They're stories. And if they're well formulated, they're archetypal stories. And this is an archetypal story that's illustrating the danger of the use of compulsion and force. And so one of the problems you're obviously obsessed by and that I'm trying to solve is what do we do as an alternative to tyranny, whether it's for a utopian purpose in the future or maybe for the purpose of like
conspiracy brands affected our whole society and the effects will only be understood by historians. True.
We do the sort of thing that you and I are trying to do right now.
Yeah, it's fucked.
Which is to have a conversation that's aimed at clarifying things. And so that's a principle that's something like the consent of the governed, right? Mm-hmm. It's something like, but it's also something like you have the right to go to hell in a handbasket if that's what you choose. And as long as you don't, in doing so, you're not in everyone's way too much. You have the right to your own destiny, right? And so, and you don't get to use power to impose that. That's the other thing that worries me about what's going on the utopian front, because the problem is, once you conjure up a climate apocalypse and you make the case that there's an impending disaster that's delayed, and you might say, well, delayed how long? And the response would be, well, we're not sure, but it's likely to occur in the next 100 or so years, which is pretty inaccurate. You now have a universal get out of jail card that can be utilized extremely well by power mad psychopaths. And they will absolutely do that because power mad psychopaths use whatever they can to further their cause.
So this is my issue, I think. This is my issue with a lot of people when it comes to political conversations. I think that everything you've said is true.
Psychological
and I think that
wars being
all of it
used.
is
So true.
It's good analysis, but I feel like it just gets wielded sometimes in one direction, and then people kind of miss that it completely and fully describes their entire side as well. And the thing that I feel like the only solution for this is you hinted at it. It's more than just conversation, although that's a good start. We have to go back to inhabiting similar areas. We have to go back to inhabiting similar media landscapes. I think the issue that we're running into right now more than anything else is people live in completely separate realities at the moment, such that if we were even to describe basic reality, how many illegal immigrants came into the United States last year? That should be a factual number that we can know.
How many do you think?
Somebody, the actual number, probably in the hundreds of thousands. I think some conservatives think it's 3 million per year over the past 3 years because they look at border contacts or they look at asylum seekers and they're not looking at
I think it's 3.6 million.
Came into the U.S. and stayed?
Yes, through the southern border.
Okay, so
the historical average is about a million.
I understand this, sure. Well, historically, there's 13 to 15 million people full stop in the United States illegally. That's like the whole history of illegal immigration in the United States. But hey, maybe I'm wrong there, right? So we can say that's an example of us living in a fundamentally different reality.
Well, the Pew Research Group has established.
This is why you watch me, Chat. Hold on. I'm objective. This is how you know I'm not bought in, because I can't say it proves I'm not woke because She-Hulk is woke. Let's get some subs for that one, Chat.
The ability over the last 20 years for illegal migration in the south border is between 300,000 and 1.2 million.
Well, the Pew Research can only establish the number of people attempting to cross. I don't know if they can. No, I don't know if Pew does census analysis. I'd have to see.
Well, that's a different issue, right? Sure. Because I don't know how you measure how many illegal immigrants there are actually in the country.
I understand. I just want to point out. I agree with you. I listened to a lot of Rush Limbaugh growing up. I understand the fear of having a government agency say climate change. Therefore, we have a blank check to do whatever we want. That's scary.
Which is what they are doing.
The conservatives do the same thing, though.
I'm not saying otherwise.
Yeah, but the problem is, I think people don't talk about it. So, for instance, I heard. So we can pretend now that the conservatives.
Well, I mean. There are, dude. Oh my! I definitely brought this up on streams before, but oh my god, the words for justice, or words of justice. Oh my god, and all the fucking Ukrainian the Russian troll farms. Ukraine might have troll farms too, but the Russian troll farms and probably the China troll farms too. Just oh my god, and it's like, oh, we're so fucked. It's so fucked. I actually think this is the big threat to democracy, man. This is the fact that foreign agents can use troll farms, especially now with large language models, it's not even just foreign agents. There's literally websites like this which like people will fucking use to just post fucking Palestinian propaganda. Like I can just immediately reply with AI. It's Gilbert enough on. I know I'm so blackpilled. Israel's claim that it slows down aid shipments for secure. Wait, what? I think it misses it. It says Israel's claim that it slows down aid shipments for security checks is baseless. The UN called, so stupid. Hashtag free Palestine. Hashtag Gaza under attack. Type fast and don't spell check. Ask about it. What? Jesus, fuck it. I can't. We're so screwed. It's so Jover. It's Jover. 94 gigahertz cloud express. True. Oh, and all in the HARP in Alaska. Are you wanna? Is it this high frequency active? Yeah. This is a thing that controls the weather. Well, this might not be the fucking thing you're talking about, but this is the conspiracy thing that controls the weather. This is what the special to. I don't know.
All three vaccines
I don't
are bad because they infringe on my freedom. That wasn't the conservative argument. The conservative argument was that mass deaths were going to happen, mass side effects were going to happen. There was going to be all this corruption and stuff related to vaccine distribution.
It is
the crazier theories were microchips, blah blah blah. None of that came true. Absolutely none of the conservative fear mongering related to the mRNA vaccines came to fruition.
Stop just quoting the Wikipedia article at me, man. If you want to summarize like the argument for me, if you want to like summarize and say the government is using cloud devices to do psychological warfare, well, it's not wiki. Bro. I don't care if it's actually the Wikipedia argument. I care that you're filling my chat with a bunch of fucking nonsense that I'm not going to read.
But now that's all forgotten, and that was.
What do you mean none of it? What do you make of the excess?
Imagine being able.
Bro, they got a third fucking advert in this.
Peterson /Jordan and use code Jordan at checkout today.
Forgotten, and that was.
What do you mean none of it? What do you make of the excess deaths?
For related to vaccines, there are almost none. The mRNA vaccines have been administered to
excess
for related to vaccines.
We don't know.
We absolutely know. We absolutely. This is like settled science.
What do we know
In terms of vaccine related?
No. That's not my question. Excess deaths in
To
Europe
fair,
are up
it
about
says
20%.
experimental and more research.
The COVID pandemic.
Really high to me. 20%.
Go look.
I'll check afterwards, but
Feeling adventurous, or if you're feeling adventurous, told me the COVID mRNA vaccine. It's not a real vaccine because it doesn't inject. Oh my fucking god, bro! It's such a stupid fucking. It's a mRNA vaccine. Okay, so it's different from a regular vaccine because it's a mRNA vaccine. But it's still like it's a type of vaccine.
Is this including like the Ukrainian war with Russia?
No, it's not including the Ukrainian war.
Okay.
No.
Are you implying that you think it's because of vaccines?
I'm not implying anything. I'm saying what the excess deaths are.
But what is your take on what's causing it?
How can he say he's not applying anything? You literally can we? Okay.
Up about 20%, and they have been
related.
No. We don't. No.
For related to vaccines, there are almost.
Jordan and use
so literally.
What do you mean none of it? What do you make of the excess deaths?
He says literally none of. Hold on. The advert is right fucking here.
Emails.
What do you make of the excess?
Conservative fear mongering related to the mRNA vaccine. The crazier.
So he mentions conservative fear mongering due to the mRNA vaccine. And then Jordan Peterson says, "What do you think of the excess deaths?"
That's not my question. Excess deaths in Europe are up about 20%, and they have been since the end of the.
And then he claims
that 20%. That means the implication is that the vaccines are causing it.
Okay.
You think it's because of vaccines?
I'm not implying anything. I'm saying.
Then he's not implying anything. You're obviously implying something, bro. You are implying something when you say that. Hold on, let me turn my compressor up a little bit, just because I'm peaking a lot, because I'm yelling a lot, because I hate Jordan Peterson. Bro, you are literally implying that the excess deaths are the... Okay, hopefully it's good.
What the excess deaths are.
But what is your take on what's causing it?
Well,
you said that
bro, I don't... What are you trying to prove with the weather modification? Like, are you literally trying to prove a government conspiracy to fucking change the weather? Because that's probably bullshit. If you're just saying, like, there's been, like I haven't been reading the thing, because it's just fucking... like 3 paragraphs of nonsense, man. I don't... Like, just summarize, like, the argument of what you think is happening.
And you said that in a counter to me describing mRNA vaccines. You said, well, the excess deaths are 20%. That means the implication is that the vaccines are causing it.
Okay, first of all, something is causing it.
Well, that obviously,
okay, something is causing it, or some combination of factors.
Sure.
Now, one possibility is that the healthcare systems were so disrupted by our insane focus on the COVID epidemic that we're still mopping up as a consequence of that.
Wait, are these excess deaths tracing back through
the real
COVID
device
as well?
for some
post-COVID.
Just post-COVID.
Post-COVID.
Okay.
Right. They're terrifying. Right. They're terrifying, and they're not well publicized. And
I think excess deaths are the fact that you're speaking to them right now seems like...
Yeah, but I ferret down a lot of rabbit holes. It's not like it's front bloody page news on the New York Times.
Sure, but I think excess deaths, that's a metric that you can Google, and I'm pretty sure there are like 3 different huge organizations that track excess deaths around the world.
There are many more than 3, yes, in every single European country. Right. Okay, well, so One relatively straightforward hypothesis is that it's a consequence of the disruption of the healthcare system, the staving off of cancer treatment, etc., the increase in depression, anxiety, suicidality, and alcoholism that was a consequence of the lockdowns, the economic disruption. And there's plenty of reason to believe that some of that is the case. But the other obviously glaring possibility is that injecting billions of people with a vaccine that was not tested by any stretch of the imagination.
I'm not implying that excess deaths are due to the vaccine. Well, the obvious implication is that because of the fucking vaccine that wasn't tested by anybody, and it was made in 1 month, and yeah, and myocarditis, caused myocarditis, and it's gonna fucking, dude. Why are you saying that you're not implying anything when 2 sentences later, you go on to literally state that one of the obvious things causing the excess death is the fucking COVID vaccine. Bro, just own it. Just own it. If that's your position, just own it.
On people also might be a contributing factor, partly because we know that it led to a rise in myocarditis among young men. And we also know that there was absolutely no reason whatsoever to ever recommend that vaccine was delivered to young children whose risk of death at COVID was so close to zero that it might as well have been.
They can transmit it. Oh my God.
The only thing that you worry about for this is
so you're talking about transmission? Because that was another thing that the COVID vaccine pushed. Yeah, but it didn't do anything to transmission.
Absolutely did, because it decreased the chance of getting infected. It didn't get rid of transmission, but it reduced
transmission.
Yeah,
but it was claimed that it would get rid of
only
transmission.
Only if you take one reading of one single quote. I think that Biden said one time where he said, no, come on. I've heard so many times because you can't take anything Trump says seriously. Biden one time on the news says, if you get the vaccine, you won't transmit it.
That is so silly. Do you know that our Prime Minister in Canada deprived Canadians of the right to travel for 6 months because the unvaccinated were going to transmit COVID with more likelihood than the vaccinated? So this wasn't one bloody statement. This was
hold on. What I'm saying is there wasn't a statement given that if you get vaccinated, there's a 0% chance of transmitting the disease. The idea is that vaccines were supposed to help because it reduces your hospitalization, it reduces death, and it reduces transmission, hopefully by making it so that people don't get sick or don't get sick for as long. All 3 of those things the vaccines did exceedingly well. They continue to do that to this day, but especially for the first variant and then the Delta variant, the vaccines helped immensely here. They were tested. The myocarditis rates are like 7 out of 100,000 injections, and the myocarditis is generally acute. And it's generally not as bad as even getting the coronavirus itself, which will lead you also to have a much worse
side effect than side effects that have caused other vaccines to be taken off the market before.
A 7 out of 100,000 rate of acute myocarditis or pericarditis is not a worse side effect than any other vaccine. I think that is a completely settled, given that the disease itself is more likely to cause myocarditis or pericarditis.
Yes, I don't think the data suggests to support that presupposition anymore. The latest peer-reviewed studies show that that's simply not true, especially among young men.
So there is an age bracket of young men where the elevated rate of myocarditis, acute myocarditis from the vaccine might have been higher, but we're talking about like 3 or 4 cases per 100,000 people. And again, myocarditis, pericarditis are generally acute conditions.
Well,
they don't last for very long.
I told you at the beginning of this conversation that the progressive leftists were on the side of the pharmaceutical companies.
It's not about being on the side of the pharmaceutical companies. It's about
really,
yeah.
Yeah, what I see as the unholy part of that alliance with the pharmaceutical companies is that it dovetails with the radical utopians' willingness to use power to impose their utopian vision.
Well, then what do you make
otherwise, how would you explain it? Because the leftists should be the ones that were most skeptical about the bloody pharmaceutical companies, and they jumped on the vaccine bandwagon in exactly the same way that you're doing right now.
Pharmaceutical companies have helped us tremendously.
Yeah, right. There we go. Fine. No, I don't think so. No.
Modern pharmaceutical companies have helped us tremendously. Oh, there we fucking go again. Oh, fucking leftist propaganda, dude. Oh my God.
No, I don't think so.
You're just wrong.
You're utterly wrong. I see. So you don't think that the pharmaceutical companies who dominate the advertising landscape with 75% of the funding are corrupt?
I don't corrupt.
He didn't. That's not even the argument he was making. The argument he was just making is that they have helped. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm gonna TOS violation. I'm on Twitch. Remember, I gotta. Vivek Ramaswamy kind of straddles the real. Vivek is fucking dude. If Vivek ends up as Trump's VP, I'm gonna TOS.
Corrupt is a very broad.
No. It's do you think that corrupt with a tinge of malevolence? Willing to extract money out of people by putting their health on the line. Do you think
that we get effective drugs from pharmaceutical companies?
Not particularly.
Okay. Do you think that any vaccines work?
Jordan,
yes.
Please.
Do you think that any?
I don't think 80 of them work at once for babies. I think that's a little risky.
But yet we've been on this vaccine schedule for how many decades?
Like this, not like this, not carefully.
I had a ton of vaccines when I was a child. I'm pretty sure that was the norm for people. There were a ton of vaccines.
There's way more now.
Okay. And you think
you can understand why. I mean, look, part of it, no doubt, part of it is a consequence of the genuine willingness to protect children. But the moral hazard is quite clear, and people on the left used to be aware of this.
What do you think the mRNA vaccine, the speeding up of it came from? How do you make for the fact that it was Donald Trump that did warp speed?
Terror. Foolish panicking, just like we're doing with the climate issue.
So you think Trump was he in bed with the pharmaceuticals? Was he working with the left? Or was it just that was the only panicky thing he made? He didn't try to push for the mass lockdowns like other far left people would want him to do. That was just the one mistake he made, was the pushing for the vaccine?
No, I think Trump undoubtedly made all sorts of mistakes. And it certainly wasn't only the left that stampeded toward the forced COVID vaccine debacle.
I didn't trust the vaccine just for what? Because you thought it was rushed? Is that what you're saying? Yep. But they fuck, I forgot they countered all the vaccine disinformation because it's fucking been a while. But basically, it wasn't rushed. They just did trials concurrently. They sped up the process of trials by doing phase 1 and phase 3 trials at like the same time. And they and it's not like this was a particularly like novel vaccine. They had already been working on similar vaccines, and I think there were literally already companies working on COVID vaccines before, not for the specific variant, but like
that it emerged on the left, because the left at least had
and there was a ton of funding poured into this.
Depredations of gigantic predatory corporations by their skepticism of the gigantic enterprises that can engage in regulatory capture, and that just vanished.
Is it not possible that maybe people looked and they said, "Hey,
bro, COVID-19 was new, but it was a variant of coronavirus. Coronavirus is not new." And there were already companies working on coronavirus vaccines before COVID-19 came around.
If all the governments, all the institutions, all the schools, all the private companies across all the countries around the world are saying the same thing, maybe it is the case that this vaccine just helps. Is that not possible?
Oh, sure. That's sure. Of course it's possible, but that didn't mean it was right. Well, they used force. They used force.
We use force for all sorts of things in terms of public health.
We don't generally use force to invade people's bodies.
How long have vaccine mandates been a thing in Canada, the United States, and the entire world?
I don't think they should have been a thing.
That's great.
That's not his point. How a decade of research for coronavirus paved the way for COVID-19. We'd already been working on like COVID vaccines. Here, haven't you seen that video? Chicken sneeze COVID. Yeah, this is a video from 11 years ago, August 2012, of the chicken sneezing, and it blew up because it had coronavirus in the title.
When we say we don't generally use force, we absolutely use force. We've even forced vaccines for a long time. It's an important part of public health.
Fair enough. We did it on a scale and at a rate during the COVID pandemic, so-called pandemic, that was unparalleled.
So-called pandemic.
We injected billions of people with an experiment.
I know, he's just saying like we use more force or whatever. It's like obviously because the risk is obviously fucking way higher. I guess he called it a so-called pandemic, so maybe he doesn't think the risk was higher, but like these were literally fucking way more, like millions of people were dying. It was a worldwide pandemic. It was overwhelming all our health systems. Obviously, we're going to take things more seriously than the seasonal flu.
It wasn't a bloody vaccine.
No, it wasn't.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It's not.
Isn't it a 100% success rate? You think it's a definition of vaccine? Well, point of the vaccine is to give your body a protein to train on so that your immune system works. Who cares if it's not the same? There's plenty. There's different types.
They used the word vaccine so that they didn't have to contend with the fact that it wasn't the same technology.
There are different types of vaccines that are different technologies.
Fine.
The mRNA vaccine is a type of vaccine technology.
Vaccines. Now this is vaccines.
No, it was like this and now it's like this.
No. It was like this and now it's like this. The mRNA technology was a radical qualitative leap forward in technology. You can call it a vaccine if you want to, but it bears very little resemblance to any vaccine that went before that. And the reason it was called a vaccine was because vaccine was a brand name that had a track record of safety, and shoehorning it in that was one of the ways to make sure that people weren't terrified of the technology. And
I think the reason it's called a vaccine is because they're injecting something that's inoculating you against something in the future because it has proteins that resemble a virus that infects you.
There are overlaps between the mRNA technologies and vaccines, to be sure, but they wouldn't have been put forward with the rate that they were put forward if they weren't a radical new technology. And it's bad in principle to inject billions of people with an untested new technology.
Isn't it also bad in principle for billions of people to get infected with a worldwide pandemic that initially was causing a decent number of deaths, a ton of complications, shutting down world economies?
Maybe it was.
So should we also engage in that analysis and figure out, like, if we look at
we're not engaging in the analysis.
No, because now we're talking about whether or not vaccines or even vaccines are not instead.
No, don't play that game. That is not what I was doing. I was making a very specific and careful case. The mRNA technology, by wide recognition, is an extraordinarily novel technology.
And that doesn't make it not a vaccine, though.
Well, okay, it's a radically transformed form of vaccine. I don't give a damn. That still makes it something so new that the potential danger of its mass administration was highly probable to be at least or more dangerous than the thing that it was supposed to protect against. And we are seeing that in the excess deaths.
Absolutely not. So are you implying all the excess deaths were caused by the vaccines? Or
I don't bloody well know what they're caused by.
now.
Well, look, if you're going to use Occam's razor, you're kind of stuck in an awkward place here.
I'm absolutely not sucking it out. This is the most administered vaccine or inoculation, or whatever you prefer to call it, the history of all of mankind. Every single organization around the world is motivated to call this out if it was a bad thing. You don't think Russia or China would be screaming if Donald Trump or the United States warp sped through a vaccine that was having deleterious effects on populations all around the world? You don't think there wouldn't be some academic institution? You don't think there'd be more than a handful of doctors and Joe Rogan and some conservatives saying this vaccine might have been bad if it was the case that American companies working with companies in Europe and Germany especially, right, because that's where BioNTech is from, in order to create or manufacture a vaccine that was causing excess deaths all around the world? There are so many different people that we motivated to call this out. How do you explain that? No, it's a handful of people. Where are the governments calling it? Where are the academic institutions calling it? Where are the other private companies calling it out? Wouldn't you stand to make a killing if you were a private company in Europe and you could say, look, the mRNA vaccines for sure are causing all of these issues? Why wouldn't Putin? Why wouldn't Xi Jinping? Why wouldn't anybody else in the world call this out? It was as horrible as it was.
There are plenty of people attempting to call
nobody credible and no huge institution.
What do you make of the excess deaths? You haven't come up with a bloody...
Oh my God.
I don't even know if there are 20% excess deaths in Europe right now. If I had to guess off the top of my head, it's going to be, like you said, one might be lingering effects of an overwhelmed healthcare system. Another one might be deaths related to the war in Ukraine. Another one might be rising energy costs that have happened for a couple of reasons.
But it's absolutely impossible that any of it could be unintended consequences of a novel technology injected into billions of people.
I think that if excess, first of all, there aren't billions of people in Europe. So if there were excess deaths, I understand, but you're talking about excess deaths in Europe. I'm not aware of excess deaths that exist in other places.
Gordon, please.
Where the only explanation would be the vaccine. I think if there were, I think more people would be talking about it.
Well, first of all, the number of people talking about something is not an indication of the scientific validity of a claim.
I agree with that, but for a vaccine,
why are you using mass consensus as the determinant of what constitutes truth?
I think for
That's never been the case.
Because I think for something that was given to billions and billions of people, if this was something that was having a measurable effect on people, it would be impossible to cover it up or ignore it. Well, we wouldn't have to look at the one case brought up on a documentary. We would have to look at the one thing being talked about.
And what do you make of the VAERS data? There's more negative side effects reported from the mRNA vaccines than there were reported for every single vaccine ever created since the dawn of time. And not by a small margin. So it's not just the excess deaths. It's the VAERS data.
What is VAERS data?
It's the database that until the COVID-19 pandemic emerged and we had the unfortunate consequence that there were so many side effects being reported, it was the gold standard for determining whether or not vaccines were safe. People didn't know what it was before COVID. And now as soon as it started to misbehave on the mRNA vaccine front, we decided that we were going to doubt the validity of the VAERS reporting system.
Okay, the VAERS reporting system is never the gold standard for anything. VAERS reporting system is going to report that there is some issue that you have after getting a vaccine.
I stopped talking about COVID a year ago unless someone in my family is sick, and I tell them they have COVID. Okay.
That's it. I think it's vaccine adverse.
What the hell do you think it was set up for?
To report adverse events that happen after a vaccine, to track and see if something was related to the vaccine.
Right.
So most people didn't even know VAERS existed until after the COVID vaccine. Once people know that it exists, of course more people are going to engage with it. But what happens?
So it's all noise.
No, it could be or couldn't be. So what do you do when a bunch of stuff?
Well, first of all, you might begin by suggesting that maybe it's not all noise.
Correct. So when all of these things are admitted to VAERS, what they do is from there they investigate. All you can do, all VAERS is I might go and get a vaccine, and maybe in 3 days I go, I got a headache. I'm gonna go ahead and call my doctor and make this report, and they'll say, okay, well it's an adverse event after vaccine. Doesn't mean the vaccine caused the headache. And now that more people know about this than ever,
I'm saying
that VAERS is not the gold standard of determining if a vaccine is working or not. Compared to actual longitudinal, prospective, randomized controlled trial studies.
You mean like the ones they should have done to the goddamn vaccines?
Like the ones that they did do for the vaccines, and they continue to do to this day. Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Yes,
you really think that you're in a position to evaluate the scientific credibility of the trials for the vaccines?
Oh my God.
Really?
No, I don't. So I have to trust.
Then what are you doing? I don't trust. I look at the bloody data.
First of all, you have to trust third parties to some extent. When you go outside,
I don't have to trust.
Of course you do. You do every day. When you turn the keys in your car, you hope your engine doesn't explode. When you're drinking water, you hope that the public water or whatever tap or bottled water you got it out of isn't contaminated or poisoned with cholera.
I don't do that as a consequence of consensus.
No, of course you do.
No, I don't. I do that as a consequence of observing multiple times that when I put the goddamn key in the ignition, the truck started.
Why do you know it's going to start the 50th or the 100th time? How many times do you wear
with me?
I'm not playing Hume. You don't know if the denim in those jeans isn't leaking into your bloodstream. To some extent, we have to trust third-party institutions to make determination.
Except when they use force. How about that?
When they use force. We trust the police officers. We trust the judicial systems.
We do. We on the left trust the police.
To some extent, do we? If somebody's breaking into your house, who do you call? I'm not a defunder, but if somebody's breaking into your house, you're the most defund person in the world. Who are you going to call? Are you going to call your neighbor? Are you going to call Joe Biden? Are you going to call Obama? Are you going to call the Black Panthers? You're going to call the police?
So tell me this. Tell me this then, because the core issue here is
I will call Joe Biden.
You know, we examined some of the weeds around that. Politicians
that's
throughout the world,
because he didn't ask how short
right now, in the aftermath of the COVID.
How long have you been here, Carter?
Tyranny, because it was more a tyranny
have
than a
you
pandemic.
seen this debate? It's actually unhinged.
We actually didn't force anybody to take the vaccine. So what do you think of that claim? So let's define force.
I think it's technically true, but I think it's silly.
What do you mean it's technically true? Define
technically
force,
true,
then.
and that in the United States, at least, I think the idea, what they tried to do, they weren't able to do it because the Supreme Court shut it down, was Biden tried to make it so that OSHA, who's the body that regulates job safety, could make it so that employees had to get vaccinated. Now, eventually, that it was,
or what?
2 minutes.
Okay, does that qualify as
there's
force?
So much.
That's why I said technically.
There's so much unhinged stuff that Jordan has said. It's actually wild. I haven't watched this. Is your name Carter too? Sorry, I'll be nice, chat. I'll be nice, chat. I need the viewership, chat.
Yeah, no, but it's a serious question. I mean, because we need to define what constitutes force before we can. It seems to me.
You could argue it's a type of force, sure. I mean, I think it'd be silly to say it's nothing. It is a type of force. It's the same as not telling you have to do this, you're going to be killed. No, but it's on the spectrum, sure. Of course, yeah.
It's as much force as the mRNA vaccines are vaccines.
Sure. It is a type of force, and the mRNA vaccines are a type of vaccine.
So look, I really think the problem was with the COVID response. I really think the problem was the use of force. I mean, I can understand to some degree, although I'm very skeptical of the pharmaceutical companies and far more skeptical than your insistence upon the utility of consensus might lead me to believe you're skeptical of them, which is surprising, I would say, given
I'm very skeptical of them. That's why I'm glad there's multiple companies, multiple countries, multiple academic institutions that do research, and the FDA. Yeah, I'm very skeptical. You should be in any private system. You should be skeptical of every private company, of course, whether we're talking media, pharmaceuticals, or automobile manufacturers. Yeah. But skepticism doesn't mean a blind adherence to the complete total opposite of whatever it is they're saying, right? They're undoubtedly, like, if you look at Alzheimer's research, there's been groundbreaking improvement on drugs to treat Alzheimer's research over the past 3 years that 5 years ago, none of these drugs even existed. And yeah, so I mean,
how about if you're skeptical of anyone who's willing to use force to put their doctrine forward?
Then you're skeptical of literally every single person, political ideology ever have existed in all of humankind. Some degree of force, you would undoubtedly believe this, right? Some degree of force is probably necessary for any kind of cohesive society, right?
No, I don't believe that.
Of course there is.
No,
even if you had a tribe of 100, 120 people, if somebody was stealing something, right? You have to punish that person.
I said earlier that becomes complicated when you're dealing with the psychopathic types, right? So that's a complication. But I would say, generally speaking, that the necessity to use force is a sign of bad policy. And no, I don't think, I'm not particularly Hobbesian. I don't think that the only reason people comport themselves with a certain degree of civility in civilized society is because they're terrified by the fact that the government has a monopoly on force that can be brought against them at any moment. I think that keeps the psychopaths in line to some degree, but I think that most people are enticed into a cooperative relationship, and that formulating the structures that make those relationships
anarcho-communist Jordan Peterson, let's go.
Because I have watched a lot of your stuff in the past. I remember you speaking very distinctly on this, that for instance, when two men are communicating with each other, there is an underlying threat of force that kind of puts on the guardrails those particular social interactions. For instance,
the threat of force is don't be psychopathic.
What is it? How broader is psychopathic here? Are we defining?
Well, I can define it. I mean,
sure, yeah, go for it.
Well, a psychopath will gain short-term advantage at the cost of long-term relationship.
Okay.
That's really the core issue. Well, you made a reference to something like that earlier in your discussion when you pointed out that people claim to be motivated, let's say, by principle, but will default to short-term gratification more or less at the drop of a hat. Yeah, exactly. Well, the exaggerated proclivity to do that is at the essence of psychopathy. So it's very immature.
With this definition of psychopathy,
it's the definition of psychopathy. It's not mine. That's the core of psychopathy.
Okay, I'm not in the United States. I think we call it all ASPD now.
No, it's separate from that's antisocial personality disorder.
I thought that subsumed psychopathy and sociopathy.
Psychopathy is more like it's more the pathological core of antisocial personality disorder.
Okay, maybe that might be true. Okay, that's
a better way of thinking. Like the worst. A small number of criminals are responsible for the vast majority of crimes. It's 1% commit 65%, something like that.
Do you think is psychopathy something that can be environmentally induced, or do you think this is core to a person?
It's both. So, for example, if you're disagreeable, like you are, by the way, your proclivity, if you went wrong, would be to go wrong in an antisocial and psychopathic direction. And that's more true of men, for example, than it is for women. That's why men are more likely to be imprisoned by law. It's 10 to 1, 20 to 1 generally. It depends on the particular crime, with it being higher proportion of men as the violence of the crime mounts. So you can imagine on the genetic versus environment side. So imagine that when you're delivered your temperamental hand of cards, you're going to have a certain set of advantages that go along with them that are part and parcel of that genetic determination. And there's going to be a certain set of temptations as well. So, for example, if you're high in trait neuroticism, you're going to be quite sensitive to the suffering of others and be able to detect that. That's useful for infant care. But the cost you'll pay is that you'll be more likely to develop depression and anxiety. And if you're disagreeable, extroverted, and unconscientious, then the place you'll go if you go badly is in the psychopathic or antisocial direction. And there are environmental determinants of that to some degree.
Sure, genes express themselves in an environment. I agree. I'm just curious for the definition of psychopathy for short-term gain at the expense of long-term
relationship. Really, that's probably the best bit. Yeah.
When you look at stuff like people that are self-destructive, say people that engage in behaviors like obesity, is that like a type of psychopathy to you, or is that like something different, or how do you define these types of things? I guess, or how do you view that type of thing?
Well, no, there is an overlap in that. Addictive processes, one of which might lead to obesity, do have this problem of prioritization of the short term. But so that overlaps with the short term orientation of the psychopath. But a psychopath an obese person isn't gaining anything from your demise to facilitate their obesity, right? So there's a predatory and parasitic element to psychopathy that's not there in other addictive short-term processes.
Do you think, is it possible that there are things, because then to circle back to the tribal example I gave, isn't it possible that people can commit harms against other people where they're not necessarily gaining from their demise, but it's just some other sort of gain? Well, so for instance, let's say I'm talking to some person, I'm just gossiping or shit-talking another person. I'm not necessarily feeling good that I'm trashing them per se. I'm feeling good because this group of friends might be more favorably because I have like a gossip or something to share with them.
Well, but that's the gain right there, and you are contributing to the demise of the people you're gossiping about.
But I think I feel like it's fundamentally different type of thought process between like, I want to say something juicy about this guy because it'll make you like me, versus I want to say something juicy about this guy, I hate this guy and I want him to like have a worse reputation among people. I feel like there's different drivers for that.
I would say that's an interesting distinction. I would say probably that the hatred-induced malevolence is a worse form of malevolence than the popularity-inducing malevolence.
Yeah, the only reason
it's a tough one.
The only reason I bring that up is because I feel like a lot of malevolence that we have social guardrails for is that type of like selfish malevolence where you're not. I would argue even the majority of malevolence in the world is usually people acting selfishly or being inconsiderate, not necessarily like I hate this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that that's why Dante outlined levels of hell, right? Yeah, well, exactly that. I mean, that book was an investigation into the structure of malevolence, right? He put betrayal at the bottom, which I think is right. I think that's right because people
to be talking about the COVID vaccine
only accompanies an encounter with malevolence rather than tragic circumstances. They are often betrayed, sometimes by other people, but often by themselves. And yes, there are levels of hell, and you outlined a couple there.
So I guess then my question is just that if you have people, so the kid that steals an orange from a stand, not because he hates the shop owner, but because he wants the orange, he's hungry, without some type of societal, it doesn't have to be the government, it could be family, religious, without some type of use of force.
Oh, they're getting back to it finally. Okay, back to 1.5.
do you think that society ever exists without
use force on your wife?
Well, what are we considering force? Is withholding sex, for instance, is that considered force, or is saying we're going to cancel a vacation?
Deprivation of an expected reward is a punishment. So you could but I mean, this is a serious question. I mean, look, if we're thinking about the optimization of social structures, we might as well start from the base level of social structure and scaffold up.
Sure. So like if a wife is upset at a husband, for instance, would that be considered use of force? I think a negative punishment. You're removing a stimulus to punish a person. Yeah. Would you consider that like a use of force? Or
I would say it would depend to some degree on the intent.
The intent is to punish it.
Well, if the intent is to punish, then it's starting to move into the domain of force. I mean, look, while we've been talking, there's been bursts of emotion, right? Yeah. And that's because we're freeing entropy and trying to close and to enclose it again. And so that's going to produces negative emotion fundamentally, most fundamentally anxiety and pain, and secondarily something like anger, because those emotions are quite tightly linked.
Sure.
And so within the confines of a marriage, because we might as well make it concrete, there are going to be times when disagreements result in bursts of emotion. And those bursts of emotion don't necessarily have to have an instrumental quality, right? It's when the emotion is used manipulatively to gain an advantage that's short-term for the person, and then maybe that's at the expense of the other person, or even at the expense of the person who benefits future self. Then it starts to tilt into the manipulative. There's a tetrad of traits. So narcissism, Machiavellianism, that's manipulativeness. Narcissism is the desire for unearned social status. That's what you'd gain, for example, if you were gossiping and elevating your social status. Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, that's predatory parasitism, and those culminate in sadism. And that cloud of negative emotion that's released in the aftermath of disagreement can be tilted in the direction of those traits, and that's when it becomes malevolent. And that's when the problem of force starts to become paramount. Because I think that your fundamental presupposition was both Hobbesian and ill-formed. I do not believe that the basis for the civilized polity is force. Now you're saying that you can't abjure the use of force entirely, and I would say unfortunately that's true.
I agree with you.
But if the policy isn't invitational, if I can't make a case that's powerful enough for you to go there voluntarily, then the policy is flawed. Now, it may be that we have some cases where we can't do better than a flawed policy because we're not smart enough. And maybe the incarceration of criminals with a long-term history of violent offenses is a good example of that. Wow. We don't know how to invite those people to play. They have a history, generally from the time they're very young children, from the age of 2, of not being able to play well with others. And it's a very, very intractable problem. There's no evidence in the social science literature at all that hyper-aggressive boys by the age of 4 can ever be socialized in the course of their life. The penological evidence suggests that if you have multiple offenders, your best bet is to keep them in prison till they're 30. And the reason for that is it might be delayed maturation, biologically speaking, but most criminals start to burn out around 27. So it spikes. It's a big spike.
Why don't my viewers go to YouTube?
And then stability among the hyper-aggressive types. So actually what happens is the aggressives at 4 tend to be aggressive their whole life, and then they decline after 27. The normal boys are not aggressive. They spike at puberty and go back down to baseline, right? And so you don't really rehabilitate people in prison for obvious reasons. I mean, look at the bloody places. They're great schools for crime in large, but if you keep them there until they're old enough, they tend to mature out of that, except the worst of them tend to mature out of that predatory,
reformist
lifestyle.
Rehabilitation issue in Peterson.
Yeah, I agree. So fundamentally, to clear my stance up, I agree that fundamentally you're not building society on force. If for no other reason, because there'd be so much friction, it would fly apart at the seams, right? You can't force.
You get resistance if you use force.
Fundamentally, we're building off of cooperation. You want to invite people to participate in society. I agree with that. I feel like once you start to hit certain thresholds or certain points, and you've got so many different types of people involved, at some point we're going to have force around the edges and the guardrails just to make sure that we don't allow. Are you familiar with like tit for tat systems?
Very.
Yeah, tit for tat is probably a really important part of our evolutionary biological history and an important part of the animal kingdom. And I think to some degree that tit for tat punishment is important.
Is that force or justice?
You can call it what it is.
No. I'm curious what you think. This is a very serious question.
Yeah.
Because the tit for tat is very bounded, right? It's like you cheat, I whack you, and then I cooperate. Right?
Yeah.
So, and I do think that there's a model there for what we actually conceptualize as justice. Sure. It's like you don't get away with it, but the goal is the reestablishment of the cooperative endeavor as fast as possible.
Of course, I agree. But in a reductionist way, we're kind of just using justice here as a stand-in for force, right?
Well,
So there are different types of tit for tat systems, right? You've got tit for tat, you've got tit for tat tat, there's all sorts of type systems where maybe you'll let somebody make a mistake 1 or 2 times, but you can't have a tit system because then somebody can come in and take advantage of it.
Yes,
so
which is the problem with the compassionate left, by the way.
To some extent, sure, it can be. Or a problem with the right that's far too forgiving of Donald Trump. But I would say that tat part, you can call it justice. I think justice is a perspective of force, right? Where some people might consider a force to be just, the cop that arrests the murderer, and other people might consider that force, that tat, to actually be injustice because the murderer was responding to environmental conditions, blah, blah, blah. Or
that's a stupid theory, that responding to environmental conditions theory. Because here's why it's not.
Well, because essentially that's Rittenhouse. It's self-defense.
So here's why. So if you assume that there's a causal pathway from early childhood abuse to criminality, let's say, which is the test case for environmental determination of the proclivity for the exploitation of others, then it spreads near exponentially in populations. That isn't what happens. So here's the data. Most people who abuse their children were abused as children. But most people who are abused as children do not abuse their children. And the reason for that is because if you were abused,
how do I have 7 concurrent viewers on YouTube?
Identify with the abuser. The other is, Right, exactly. And what happens, and if this didn't happen, every single family would be abusive to the core very rapidly.
Yeah.
What happens is the proclivity for violence itself, it dampens itself out as a consequence of intergenerational transmission. So the notion that privation is a pathway to criminality, that's not a well-founded formulation. And there are an infinite number of
Nothing is like getting views.
And some of the best people I know, and I mean that literally, are people who had childhood so absolutely abysmal that virtually anything they would have done in consequence could have been justified. And they chose not to turn into the predators of others. And that was a choice, and often one that caused them to reevaluate themselves right down to the bottom of their soul. And so that casual association of relative poverty even with criminality, we know this too. You take a neighborhood where there's relative poverty, the young men get violent. They don't get violent because they're all hurt and they're victims. They get violent because they use violence to seek social status. And so even in that situation, it's not, the poor. It's no wonder they're criminals.
But still, that's responding to their environment still, though. Like, regardless of like, the particular reason why they're doing it, that's still, like, a response to their environment, right? And also, it's like, I don't know. It's like, it seems like a lot of people who are, if you're abused as a kid, right? Like they said, the 2 lessons you can learn, either to abuse your kid or to never abuse a kid. Like, either way, you're not really, like, responsible for learning that lesson, right? Like that decision is just an outgrowth of your environment as a child, and like you're not really responsible either way.
Because they need bread. It's like, sorry, buddy, that's not how it works. The hungry women feeding their children don't become criminals. The extraordinarily ambitious young men who feel it's unfair that their pathway to success become violent. And that's 100% well documented, and generally by radically left-leaning scholars.
Sure, I don't disagree with any of that. Wealth inequality in areas is a much better predictor of crime than poverty, than absolute.
Right, but it's a very specific form of crime. It's status-seeking crime by young men. Right, well, but that shows you what the underlying motive is. It's not even redress of the economic inequality. It's actually the men striving to become sexually attractive by gaining position in the dominance hierarchy.
Well, I think you have to be really careful with that assessment, though, because you can say that it's not economically, it's not seeking economic.
Why do you have to be careful? The biggest predictor of male...
Well, because we're assuming that people that commit crime in these types of circumstances are status-seeking and not trying to seek economic remedy. But
That's exactly what we're assuming.
But it might be the case, for instance, that in economically prosperous areas, that the men there aren't actually seeking economic prosperity. They're also just trying to elevate status, but they do it through economic prosperity. It's potential, right?
They do it with a longer-term vision in mind.
Sure,
they're trying to elevate. I wouldn't disagree with that in the least.
Sure.
But they do it with a much longer time horizon in mind.
Yeah, so
and we
they're
know this
not
partly because
psychotic.
there have been detailed studies of gang members, for example, in Chicago, who are trying to ratchet themselves up the economic ladder, but they do it with a short-term orientation. Most of them think they're going to be dead by their early 20s.
Sure.
So they're trying to maximize short-term gain. So it has nothing to do with the redress of economic inequality, except in the most fundamental sense. And it is status-driven because they're looking for comparative status.
Sure, I don't think any human being has baked in a desire to seek economic prosperity. I think that's like a third-order thing that we look for. And fundamentally, it's probably more like safety, security for ourselves, and then status-seeking for other things.
I think that changes when you have children.
Well, I mean,
because your status is irrelevant, or starts to become irrelevant at that point.
I mean, depending on how you view your status, right?
You can't do that every time we have a discussion.
Well, I'm just saying, for instance, one of the important things for my child to be able to send my child to a good school, I need to have elevation status, right? I need to be able to buy a house at the right school district, I need to be able to pay the education.
Right, but you're not telling me, I hope, that the driving factor behind your desire to care for your children is an elevation in your status.
No, but I'm saying that the elevation of status might be what allows you to take care of children. So, for instance, one of the biggest predictors of getting married is already
status
achieving
or position.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying there's a
I know
all of these things can play into
Okay, look, we're running out of time.
You're good.
You're smart. You're smart.
I was going to say that tit for tat thing. I was just saying that the tat thing, there is some underlying built into probably our genes, right? Because we see it all throughout the animal kingdom that there's some level of punishment or some level of force.
Justice. No, but I think it's the right.
It's justice when you're the tatter, not when you're the titter, though, right?
No,
when you're the titter, it's just retribution.
No, I don't think that's true either. Look, if you read Crime and Punishment, for example, one of the things you see that emerges when Raskolnikov gets away with murder, and it's a brutal murder, and he gets away with it. It's completely clear, and he has a justification for it. And what happens as a consequence is that disturbs his own relationship with himself so profoundly that he can't stand it, such that when a just punishment is finally meted out to him, it's a relief. And that's not rare. And that is, like, there isn't anything more terrifying. This is why Crime and Punishment is such a great novel. There isn't anything more terrifying than breaking a moral rule that you thought you had the ability to break and finding out that you're somewhere now that you really don't want to be. And then that, you know, there's nothing worse in your own life than waiting for the other shoe to drop. If you've transgressed against a moral rule and now you're an outsider because of that, you live in no man's land, the fact that you have just retribution coming to you, that can be a precondition for your atonement and your integration back into society.
But it's probably important to note that depending on the system you exist in, those moral transgressions just aren't, right? So to take it back to, I'll use your leftist example, you might consider threat of force for somebody to get a vaccine to be a highly immoral thing that might be a transgression against some fundamental moral thing, but a person on the left might think that they're actually satisfying their moral requirement to society by doing so. Much the same as a child soldier, or not only a child soldier, but maybe an older person that's committing intifada or some kind of Islamic terrorist thinks that they're fulfilling some moral calling as well.
No doubt that that's the case. That's why I was focusing in on the use of force, is that I think it's a good rule of thumb policy that if you have to implement your goddamn scheme with force, then there's something wrong with the way it's formulated.
Does it
There's
bother
no
that every
reason we
religious-
could have used a pure invitational strategy to distribute the vaccine. It would have been much
Oh my
more
God.
effective. And it was bad policy, rushed. We're in an
It
emergency.
would have
We
been much
to
more
use
effective when there was fucking copious information about the
force. It's like,
vaccine.
no,
Yeah.
No, you weren't. It wasn't the kind of emergency that justified force, not least because behavioral psychologists have known for decades that force is actually not a very effective motivator. It produces a vicious kickback. So, one of the things, this is going to happen for sure, is that the net deaths from people stopping using valid vaccines as a consequence of general skepticism about vaccination is going to cause, in my estimation, over any reasonable amount of time, far more deaths than COVID itself caused. You violate people's trust.
That's your fault, Jordan. You're the one propagating misinformation. You can't, oh my God, you can't literally be like, well, what do you make of the excess deaths in Europe that are 20%? What do you think of myocarditis? And then say, well, I think the long-term cost from people mistrusting vaccines is going to be really high. And that's because the left's fault. Because they're using force. You're literally the one spreading misinformation about the excess deaths of the COVID vaccines. Thanks for the sub, man. Thank you. Oh my God, Jordan, please. Jordan, please. Jordan, please. Oh my God, bro.
In the public health system at your great peril. And you do that by using force. And we did that. And so you can see already that there's hordes of people who are vaccine skeptics. Very
subbotting me too, man?
That to some degree you were rightly decrying.
I don't know.
It spreads like wildfire, and no
What do you
wonder.
mean it won't let you
go
any higher in
I'm going to
views?
be a
I don't
little
know what the
skeptical of
fuck
you for
you're-
a long time. This conversation, we're here voluntarily. Like we're
I
trying to hash
prefer if you
things out in
didn't
good faith,
fucking view bot
but
my
neither of us
channel
compelled the
or
other to
sub
come here,
bot
and
my
neither of us are
channel.
compelled to continue. And so that makes it a fair game. And a fair game is something that everyone can be invited to. And I suppose that's something that's neither right nor left, hopefully, right? Something we could conceivably agree on. And I also think that I don't have any illusions about the fact that there are people on the right who would use power to impose what they believe to be their core.
No subs for me. I kind of doubt that, man.
Their core idol.
I think at least one of these people would have typed in chat before
Is
subbing.
rightly pointed to by the leftists
Okay.
who insist that power is the basis for everything. It isn't the basis for everything. That's wrong. It's really wrong. But it's a
Dude, this is
severe
all
enough
just
impediment
fucking
to
fake
progress
people,
forward that
man.
we have to be very careful about it. So look,
Dude, it's gonna fucking hurt my
I want to
engagement.
know if there's anything else you'd like to say before we stop, because unfortunately we have to stop rather abruptly. And so,
I feel like we got pretty far into this.
what are you trying to accomplish? Let's start with that. We found out a little bit about who you are. I mean, you formulated your proclivity to some degree, in terms of delight in argumentation or facility at it, which you certainly have. The danger in that, of course, is that you can be oriented to win arguments rather than to pursue the truth. And that's the danger of having that facility for argumentation. Sure. But what are you hoping to accomplish by engaging in conversations like this in the public sphere? Elevation of status, that's one possibility.
No, I feel like I think debate or argumentation is good because it forces two sides to make their ideas somewhat commensurate to the other. If two people are having a conversation, they have to be able to communicate said ideas to the other person. Otherwise, it's just a screaming match. And I think there is a good, for the sake of just being bipartisan or having a collection of people in some area, having different people together, just that in and of itself.
Are you just saying goodbye to him?
Produces a good, at least for a democratic society. For instance, I would agree that school, maybe not faculty, but administrators are very, 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 very far left today. Dangerously so. I don't have to talk to you about this, obviously. But I think part of the responsibility to that, rests at the feet of conservatives who, instead of maintaining participation in the system, decide that they're going to throw their hands up and disengage. When I go and I see,
be forced out,
sure.
In my case,
that's fine. Yeah, sometimes it can happen. But I think often, rather than accepting being forced out, or rather than encouraging other people to disengage, the engagement has to happen. It can't be I'm losing faith in the system, so all of us are going to do our thing. It has to be like, no, we're going to be here in these conversations, whether you like it or not, because in a democracy, sometimes the guy you don't like wins. Sometimes the policy that you don't like is enforced. Sometimes a guy you don't like is somebody you have to share an office or a classroom with, and we need to be okay with that. And I'm worried that the internet is driving people into these very homogenous but very polarized groups.
The data on that, by the way, aren't clear.
Like me.
Like whatever's driving polarization doesn't seem to be as tightly related to the creation of those internal bubbles as you might think. Like I've looked at a number of studies that have investigated to see whether people are being driven into homogenized information bubbles, and it isn't obvious that that's the case directly, although the polarization that you're pointing to, that you're concerned about, that seems to be clearly happening. So, and why that is, well, that's a matter of, intense speculation.
I feel like the homogeneity, I feel like it's not so much, this is not research-based at all, it's just a total feeling, so I'll admit that. But the feelings that I have is, it's not necessarily that homogeneity has increased, it's that homogeneity has increased as a byproduct of the bubbles becoming larger. So for instance, it might be that, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, it's a town or city really, in Nebraska, right? It might have been that 50 years ago, there are bubbles in living in Omaha, and there are different bubbles for living in Lincoln. And there might be bubbles in Toronto, or neighborhoods in Toronto, or there might be bubbles in Vancouver. But now, as the internet exists and things become more internationalized, these bubbles it's not just a bubble that exists in these cities, now the bubbles have come together. And as a result of them coming together,
problem.
Sure, yeah, or a globalization problem or a communication problem. But you run into this issue where somebody might be in a particular city or state and have a really strong opinion about what AOC says, but they don't know anything about their local political scene. And I think that that's an issue because the bubbles have gotten so large and they're encompassing so many people now, and you're expected to have a similar set of beliefs between all of these different people now that might live in totally different places. That's, I think, a big issue we're running into.
Yeah, well, that could be, we'll close with this, I think. That might be one of the unintended consequences of hyperconnectivity, right? Is that we're driving levels of connectivity that get rigid and that we also can't tolerate. Yeah. All right. Well, that's a good place to stop. Well, thank you very much for coming in today. That's much appreciated. And you're a sharp debater and good on your feet, so that's fun to see. And I do think that your closing remarks were correct. Is that the alternative to talking is fighting, right? So when we stop talking, it's not like the disagreements are going to go away.
Yeah.
We will start fighting, right? And talking, right? Absolutely. And talking can be very painful because a conversation can kill one of your cherished beliefs, and you will suffer for that. Although maybe it'll also help you. But the alternative to that, death by offense, is death. Right. Yeah. Right. So better to substitute the abstract argumentation for the actual physical combat.
For sure.
Right.
Sometimes like the worst relationships are the ones where couples fight a lot. It's
Yeah,
like the really bad ones where they don't fight ever, and then all of a sudden there's
the couples who fight and reconcile. Are the ones that, yes, exactly. All right. Well, that was good. Thank you very much. And for everyone watching and listening on the YouTube platform, thank you very much for your time and attention. And we're going to spend another half an hour or so on the Daily Wire side.
Thank you to you, chat.
Tune into that. We'll find out a little bit more about the background of our current interviewee, Destiny. See you later, guys.
Jesus. Oops, I didn't mean to click on that. Well, that was interesting. Definitely, dude. I can't believe Jordan Peterson is that unhinged now. I don't get it, man. What do you think about Jordan Peterson? He has no comment. But he doesn't like me using force to coerce him. Maybe some W's.